Hello. Hope everyone can hear me. So, yeah, this is going to be a different stream tonight. So forgive me if I have audio issues initially. Due to the poor computer setup that I have, it's hard for me to do live video while I'm doing a conference call or a debate or something like that. So thank you, Carvo. So I've actually been invited to join a friend of mine that I met named Primecayes. Prime is, I believe, a self-described socialist, supporter of Black Lives Matter. So we're going to have a discussion about Black Lives Matter tonight and whether or not it's a good thing. If what I'm going to do for all of you is, if for whatever reason I'm lagging or anything like that, I'm going to happily put his channel up there. So give me 1 second and I'll put it in the chat. But I think the link's also in the description. So he will have the video as well, if that's something you're into. But let's be honest, you've seen my handsome face many times before. And I think that our voices sound different enough. I got this squeaky kind of, I'm always way too loud voice. Prime's got more of a regular voice. So I think that you'll be able to tell us apart, no problem. Let me just say a couple things about Prime before I join him. I'll be joining him here shortly. I think he's a nice guy. I think we're going to have disagreements. It could get a little contentious because I think Black Lives Matter is probably something that's important to him. So no doubt that he, it's a difficult topic. Don't get me wrong. So it could get contentious. But yeah, I feel that I try to keep my head most times. I don't see me getting too extreme or anything like that. I predict that the debate, I'm not calling it a debate, I'm calling it a discussion. My prediction for this will be, I'll levy a bunch of criticisms of Black Lives Matter. He'll say that's not what Black Lives Matter really is. It's more of his interpretation of it, and there's no real leader of Black Lives Matter, so it might not be fair for me to point to a bunch of bad things that have happened in the name of Black Lives Matter. So I'll try to approach it at multiple levels and just discuss why I think Black Lives Matter is a bad thing. But yeah, I think I only ask that, you guys say what you want. I have moderators here, I think, somewhat. But try to be slightly respectful of him, but feel free to, if you don't like his opinion, certainly say so. But I just want to say, for what it's worth, I think he's a really nice guy. I think that he's been more than fair to me, even though we disagree on about everything politically. And he's a young guy that I think, I encourage even people on the left, even some that was a socialist, to actually at least get involved and try to discuss ideas with people that might differ than them. Because I think a lot of people that are younger, that are going through the education system, don't really get exposed to a lot of different argumentation. So I certainly am approaching this in good faith, willing to hear him, willing to have my mind changed. And I think that he's a good faith actor too, and that hopefully he'll be doing that. But kudos to him for being willing to have a discussion with someone like me. So what we'll do is, I'm going to, forgive me if I have a few audio issues here. I'm going to leave him run the show as if it's his show, even though I'm broadcasting here. So I'll leave him take the lead as a host, which I don't think anyone of my followers will have a problem with. But if you like this type of, let me just say real quick before I join, I told him I'd get on there at 10:30. Hey, what's up, Jojo? How you doing, Jesse? Ford Nation, Modus, Carvo, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Let me just say real quick about these debates in general. I like doing them. I like debate. It takes a lot out of me, though, because you have to understand, I'm working all day. I don't have time to prep for these. Normally, when I debated in college, you prepped all week for one tournament. So, I'm just kind of going in this flying by the seat of the pants. I think I'll do fine. That's not an excuse or anything. But it takes a lot out of me. If you saw the debate last evening, for example, on intersectionality, it's very difficult to have these debates because a lot of times it's two ships passing. So we couldn't even agree on a definition of what intersectionality was last night, which, I thought that I did a better job, obviously. I assume my opponent thinks they did a better job, but I thought that, I did a good job of articulating why it matters and how it's used in the real world. And I think that's what a lot of this debate will be. But oftentimes when I do these debates, it's kind of what I see as a denial of reality, of what we see going on at the streets, in politics, in academia, etc. I'm sure my opponents think the same thing. So it does take a lot out of me, and I'm going to take some time. I'll still be doing my regular live streams, but I'm going to probably take a week or two off from these debates after this. If it's something that you like, please shoot me an email or let me know on here. And, the more support I get, financial or growing my channel, the more I'll be able to do things like that. So if you like. So All right, let me see if I can connect with him. Still trying to connect. So, voice connected. Oh, wait, maybe. Oops, I'm on mute. Can you hear me, Prime? Let's see. Also, Prime picks on me because I think I'm... Oh, okay. I think I'm on the wrong... Maybe not. Worst generation. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, man. Thanks for having me. So just so you know, I'm just doing audio on my channel. I hope that's not a problem. If it is, I could shut it off.
No, that's fine.
Okay. My computer's so bad, I can't, like, live stream video. It'll probably be lagging, and I told everyone on my channel, please, I put your link to please go over if I'm lagging too bad, so...
Yeah, I feel you, buddy.
Boomer problems.
Yeah. I feel you. Okay, so we're going to I gotta like to sound out exactly what I'm doing at all times.
Yeah, no problem.
Or I'm gonna screw it up. Okay. Oh, there I am. All right.
I don't know what's going on with my camera. It should be working, but as you can see, it's giving me grief.
Are you...
Let me try.
You sure your camera's not activated anywhere else? Like,
it might be.
Is anything else using?
How do I change that?
Yeah.
1 second. Let me.
Take your time. Take your time. I'm glad that we have you here.
Well, is there? I hate to say this, but the only way I'd know to fix it is to like shut my stream off. Is it all right if I just go without camera? You cool with that? Just with the.
That's fine. That's fine. Your
it might be
beautiful, handsome voice will have to.
Yeah, and I was gonna say if people could see how beautiful I am, it might influence them. So this might work better, anyways.
But yeah, I'm happy to have you here, Rob.
Thank you.
We've talked quite a few times before, and I've enjoyed our conversations, even if we don't arrive at any sort of consensus or anything like that. I think we have a good talks. I think, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think you're a good faith actor. You're seeing this from your conservative perspective, which is obviously different from my commie socialist perspective, but that's okay. And I'm glad to have you here nonetheless.
Yeah, and I just want to say real quick, I was already telling my audience, I think that one of the most, regardless of any disagreements we have, the first step that we as individuals could do to try to bring this country together, I think, is being willing to discuss things with people that disagree with us. So I really appreciate what you're doing on your channel, and I can't recommend your channel enough. I put the links on all of my channel because I think that you do a very good job on a nightly basis of giving a fair shake to people with different perspectives. So I really appreciate that.
No problem, man. And I'm glad to have you here. All right, let's get started then.
Sure.
Black Lives Matter. Yay or nay, I guess.
Yeah, I say no. I say that I don't like the organization. I think that the term Black Lives Matter is something that, of course, everyone would agree with, that we should value all lives, including Black lives. But I think that the organization, particularly the people that are running it, have more of a socialist Marxist agenda that seeks to destroy kind of the history of this country. And it's leading to a bunch of recommendations that I think would not only be bad for the country, but would actually be markedly worse for inner city Black communities as well.
All right. Well, socialist Marxist agenda. I didn't know you hacked into my ASMR. Well, that sounds good to me. But I disagree with. Well, okay, it depends. Okay, so yeah, this is what the debate is, guys. Is that and maybe I should make it more clear. Is that like our good friend Rob here believes that Black Lives Matter is destroying the systems of our country. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And I guess I would just ask you, do you think that there is sort of a socialist Marxist vein running through the people that are kind of at the top of Black Lives Matter?
Um. Okay. The people at the top. I'm not exactly sure who that would be. I mean, there is. Black Lives Matter isn't the same as, for instance, the Occupy movement, right? Where it was completely decentralized, right? Like, there's more chapters here. There's an ongoing thing happening. So there is some sort of vague-ish structure, but like there is not orders coming down from the top. So if you want to say there is leadership for Black Lives Matter, okay, fine. But whatever their political inclinations, I don't think directly translates into like what happens on the streets. So yes, I imagine there's quite a bit of leftists, quite a number of leftists at the top, but I don't know if that actually translates to a socialist Marxist movement. I wish it did, but I don't think that's exactly where it's going with that.
Well, I think that the way that we see from some of the mission statements and the way we see in practice what people are demanding, that certainly the at least ideological and cultural leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, I mean, we've had several of them admit that they're trained Marxists. And then we see that there are people like, even if it's not Marxism necessarily, there's definitely a vein of the people that are the loudest voices within Black Lives Matter that seem to be suggesting removing a lot of the institutions of the country. For example, someone like Shaun King, or even kind of a cultural icon that is identified with Black Lives Matter, such as Colin Kaepernick. So I guess that's what I'm talking about, the leadership. But I do agree with you. I don't think it's like a political party in the sense that like the Democrats have someone who's the head of the Democratic National Committee. But certainly there are leaders, and those leaders have more of an agenda than the average person that's marching with them on the street.
Okay, sure. I'll give you that. Fine.
And so I think then when we look at a lot of the policy prescriptions and the actions and words of these leaders, that we start to see some really troubling things. Not only kind of the destruction of the culture and the history of the United States, even demanding things like statues of people like Lincoln be removed, who, you know, was the president that gave us emancipation. But there's also just this vein of like disrupting the nuclear family, which I know we'll probably disagree on exactly what that means, and many other things that's leading to a culture of what I would consider intimidation and cancel culture that's trying to silence everyone who disagrees with these sort of socialist Marxist views. And I think this is a very dangerous thing.
Okay, so let me tackle the last part first. The whole cancel culture thing, I think, exists wholly independent of Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement. So now, can people who align themselves with the BLM movement engage in cancel culture? Absolutely, yes. Yes, certainly. People do that. I disagree with cancel culture. I've talked about it many times in this channel, but I don't see BLM as a cause or even an aggravator of that culture. Like that's like a thing that's happening in leftist spaces, one way or the other. And I want to be clear, it happens on the right as well. Cancel culture, I think. But we can focus on the left. It's fine. And I think that that's a thing that's endemic to the left, but not specifically endemic to BLM. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I certainly that's true. Cancel culture existed before even this newest phase of the power that we see with BLM. But certainly this is an unprecedented level of power where we've seen things such as an LA Galaxy soccer player fired because his wife tweeted something about riots. We've seen professors, such as a professor at UCLA that was fired and had to have protection because he was getting death threats because he had the temerity to suggest that black and white students should all take the same test. And so I think that you're seeing sort of this idea of intersectionality and kind of what I would call cultural Marxism that's been manifesting in our academia for years, starting to manifest in a sort of an even more of a cancel culture, in the sense that Black Lives Matter is the premier organization that you can't criticize in areas where leftists have levers of control of the institutional power, which is about every single institution in our country at this point.
Okay, hold on. You have to go back there for a second. You're saying that BLM is suddenly so powerful that it's immune from criticism from all the levels, the levers of power of this nation? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just about. So, for example, have you ever seen any sort of movement like this that has been universally endorsed by corporations or by academia or by Silicon Valley? Yeah.
So again, I think we discussed this before. The fact that multi-billion-dollar corporations have blacked out their tweets or their Twitter or whatever the hell, that is not that means nothing. That's a PR stunt, right? Like it's an easy thing to say yes to, is what it is, right? Like and because corporations are responding to the fact that younger generations are far more in tune with these racial issues, right? And they can understand that from a PR perspective, there is only upsides of doing these vague bullshit symbols that mean nothing in the end, accomplish nothing in the end, right? So they're more than happy to engage in the symbolism, but to say that that necessarily means that they're on board with Black Lives Matter. You come back and you tell me that when they restructure their board membership, when they restructure their executives, right? When some of these companies with their all-white executive team, yeah, you tell me when they change that, then we'll say they're on board with Black Lives Matter. But until then, no, I don't buy that at all.
Okay, but still, even if it's just a shallow endorsement, it is a shallow endorsement that's encouraging and facilitating this sort of cancel culture. And it's not just corporate America. That's one institution of like six that I named. For example, academia, Silicon Valley, the entertainment industry, the mainstream media. It is widely known that if you criticize Black Lives Matter in these circles, you very much risk your job. I myself have had people, and I think, Prime, I hope that at this point we have a good enough relationship to know that I don't think that I'm a terrible person or anything like that. We might have disagreements, but
I don't think so either.
I've had people, at least 3 people, leave messages to me on my YouTube channel that they will be contacting my employer to try to get me fired. And why? Because, I disagree with the message of Black Lives Matter, in part because I think it's harmful towards the Black community. But the other thing I'll say on that the point you just made there is, yes, this is another reason that Black Lives Matter is so bad. Because we're starting to see that all of these institutions of power can get away from actual systemic change that would help all Americans, including inner city Black Americans, by merely saying some symbolic things about Black Lives Matter. And I know I've talked to you specifically about, we saw evidence of riots burning down all of these businesses, yet Chase Bank was left to stand. Why? Because they put Black Lives Matter in their windows. And so we have all of these people with power that are just paying lip service to the movement. And everyone's like, yay, look at how good Nike is. Look at how good Amazon is. When in reality, they're not doing anything to improve the lives of Black people. But they'll get away with it because Black Lives Matter encourages this sort of symbolism that the symbolic nature of bending the knee to them is enough. And they don't have to solve the structural problems.
No. Pushing back hard now. Okay, so here's the problem with this. One, it's not as if, again, and I think one thing is that you're assuming more cohesiveness within this movement than there is, right? And that, this corporation has said nice things, so we will turn our attention away, right? As if even if whoever the leadership, however you want to define that, right, had the power to redirect the anger or the attention of the movement itself. No, they don't have that ability to do that, right? And plenty of Black people are not fooled by this. Like, I'm not the only Black person making these exact same points about how shallow, as you put it, these PR stunts are. Next, right? I think if there is a kernel of truth to what you're saying, it lies in the utter failure of the mainstream media, utter failure of the white liberals who run those institutions, who have for years, forever it seems, right, been satisfied with symbolism, right? That's why they don't stop talking about the fucking statues, right? Even though there are actually bigger movements happening, like bigger concessions being made, like more substantive concessions being made, and municipalities around the country, right? Like actual movement towards the goals of the George Floyd protests. Things are actually moving in those places, but they're talking about the goddamn statues, right? And it's such a big focus because it's a symbol and it's easy because that doesn't threaten anyone's power, right? Because then we don't have to talk about their corporate donors, right? And how, again, those corporate donors may treat their African American workers, right? How little they may pay them, as little as possible. Oftentimes, with our pathetic minimum wage, providing low wage workers who are many times are African American with pathetic benefits, right? Like, or no benefits, period. And then forcing those workers to have to be on welfare, like as just part of their business model. Like, for instance, like Walmart, part of its business model is that its employees will be on welfare because it's not going to pay enough. See, we don't have to talk about any of that. We don't have to talk about any of that because, they put they blacked out their Twitter account or whatever they did, right? So that if you're going to direct your ire at anyone for that particular reason, I would think you should do that to the mainstream media, which I think we can both agree on oftentimes fails us all.
Right. But everything you're saying, I totally agree with. The problem is, because of the symbolic nature of the fights that Black Lives Matter are taking, the way this has played out in the past, why didn't it make systemic changes, for example, in 2015? Because this is exactly what happens. People with institutional power pay lip service to the agenda of Black Lives Matter. It eventually satiates the people in Black Lives Matter, at least the bulk of the people that are marching with them. And they say, yay, I voted for Democrats. Everything's going to be good. And then 4 years later in an election year, we'll talk about these problems again. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of blacks are being killed in these inner cities, and neither political party is doing anything to help it. So instead of focusing on how both of these political parties are letting down not just blacks, but also all people of regular constituents in this country, working class people, instead we're focusing on these symbolic victories. And I could prove that this is true, that the BLM's on this, because why isn't BLM then going to the homes of these corporations, or going to the senators and the politicians' homes and having their protest and even riots that we see occurring there? Instead, it seems to be happening in poor inner city neighborhoods and seems to be directed more towards average Trump supporters or average people that don't necessarily align with the agenda of Black Lives Matter.
So we have seen them march. First of all, like you named it, right? You said previously that they've had their marches in downtowns in the moneyed areas of cities, right? Which is where the some of those businesses were looted, right? Like you said, was it Chase or something? Avoided that by putting BLM in the window. So it's not like it's only happening within these marches are only happening within black neighborhoods. They're happening all over the place. Also, we've seen them march on politicians' houses. In fact, that's where that image that came out last week, I want to say, with those two white, well-to-do, I think one was a lawyer or something, standing ground on their property with guns, right, as BLM protesters marched through, because they weren't coming for those white residents. They were going to protest against the mayor of, I believe, the mayor of that city, because she doxed BLM protesters. I believe that's what the story was. But like, we've seen them actually take these things to the houses of senators. So I mean, we've seen them on the streets of Washington. We've seen them everywhere. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, these are focused in one spot. Like, that's not the case.
I think that it's obvious that that's not where the majority of their effort is. And even in the example you give, that St. Louis couple claimed that they were getting some very heinous threats shouted at them as well. And given what we've seen in other areas, riots and police refusing to show up, I fully endorse their right to defend themselves and what they did. But even if it's true that they weren't targeting them specifically or going for the mayor, you yourself just said it, because the mayor did something specifically against Black Lives Matter. Where are they with the majority? Yeah, right, but they're not doing that with the majority of politicians that aren't specifically coming out. Therefore, the argument I made initially, the lip service to Black Lives Matter, is enough to satiate Black Lives Matter from not targeting you.
Hold on. So, if that woman specifically, the mayor specifically, put those people's lives in danger, that's why they marched on them. Not because she said something bad about BLM, because she specifically tried to put those people's lives in danger. When you have the armed, thuggish police force that could use violence against those protesters. Like, that's why they marched against her, not because she disagreed with BLM. There are lots of people who disagree with BLM, but they didn't march on their homes or anything.
But
like
isn't
that.
the argument of BLM that systemic racism is putting all blacks' lives in danger? So why only focus on when one person specifically says something about BLM? Wouldn't it be true that BLM thinks that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump and Marco Rubio, all of them, because they're part of a systemic racist system, would be putting lives of black people in danger? Where are the marches on? It's quite strange. It only seems to be marching on the right side of the ledger.
Well, well, first of all, hold on. Again, I don't think you have the full view of this, right? For instance, the Minneapolis mayor is Democratic, right? To your point that both parties have been failing African Americans in this country, right? So the mayor of Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed, right? He comes in on a reform platform, reforming the police, right? And then this happens under his watch, and I believe so did his police chief coming under that same reform banner. But this happens nonetheless, right? So he goes to he comes to a Black Lives Matter protest, a George Floyd protest. I guess we're intermingling these two together permanently, and that's fine. So let's pretend they're exactly the same thing. But he goes to the protest, and they're talking about defunding the police, and he doesn't agree to it, and then the crowd boos him away, right? Like he literally has to do a walk of shame out there. They protested him too. They said we got to vote him out. Like this is not. You seem to be thinking this is on one side. No, they're against all politicians who are signed up with, who they are against everyone who has let the African American community down in the past. Like. And again, and also, I want to get away from this dynamic of saying that Black Lives Matter is some one cohesive movement where like orders are being passed down the top, and that we share opinions as to what should be done, where it should be done. It absolutely is not the case, right? Some people will just focus on Republicans. Others, like me, have been talking about the Democrats the entire time. Like go back, most of my streams, I'm talking about the Democrats, not the Republicans, because Democrats, white liberals, are the ones who have failed us time and time again. So,
okay, so I do appreciate you for that. I really do. But this is one of the problems we have when we discuss something like a movement like Black Lives Matter, because they don't have an actual head of their organization. It allows people to say, well, I just agree with the good things Black Lives Matter is doing and not the bad things. And that becomes a problem because we've seen really heinous things that have been done in the name of Black Lives Matter, such as pigs in a blanket fry 'em like bacon, or such as...
that happened one time. That happened one time years ago. One time, right? And at the time, I remember that specifically, right? So I have to push back on this. On that specific point, like there was a, in case people don't know what Rob is referring to, right? There was a BLM protest many years ago near the start of the movement, right? You had cops on some sort of vehicle, right? And they were driving ahead of the protesters, right? Protesters were marching behind, and then they started like having an interaction with the cops, a friendly interaction, right? And they started like jeering each other. And the protesters said, pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon, or whatever it was. But that happened one time, and then Fox News plays it again and again, nonstop, as if this is the model of BLM. It is not. It happened one time, and then they've never heard the end of it.
ACAB?
So, gotta put that out there. ACAB, yeah. All cops are bastards. Bastards are bad. That once again predates the BLM. That's
but
not
it's clear. But again,
but people.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, please finish your point.
But here's the thing: just because you could say, "Oh, cancel culture was before BLM," or saying all cops are bastards was before BLM, it is clear that many of the people that are marching with the ideology of Black Lives Matter are doing heinous things like saying "death to police," defund, or abolish the police. All cops are bastards. They did say things like "pigs in a blanket, fry 'em like bacon." You can see video after video of them screaming in police officers' face, including saying that they're not well educated. That all sorts of things like this. And I think that oftentimes what happens is that the mainstream media and these corporations and others in the establishment that are giving cover to Black Lives Matter want to gloss over the fact that there are these really terrible things happening. I mean, just here's one of the most terrible things I can imagine.
Pause right there, and I will let you go on.
Sure.
I'm just having some movement in my channel. First of all, thank you, Savage Like Fred, for the hot tier 1 sub. I really appreciate it. Welcome to the Worst Generation. And then thank you for the homie Dylan Burns coming in with 33 raiders. Really appreciate my friend coming in and with that support. Like, that means so much to me. It helps the channel.
What's up,
so
Dylan?
Much.
How's it going?
Yeah. He's being extremely kind to me once again, helping me out by coming through. Raiders, I was supposed to make this command as well. I forgot to do that. Raiders, if you are here, Rob's there. Rob's here. Rob's with me. Raiders, if you're coming from Dylan Burns' channel, please click my link here. Please click my link and then watch the stream directly on my channel. That helps my analytics a lot. It just helps the channel grow. So please do that. And if you haven't followed yet, please follow me. We're having a debate here with Rob, who's kind enough to join us about Black Lives Matter and whether it is destroying America. Thank you for the follow. Literally the only sane. And thank you. Oh, I'm getting a few ones coming in. Ray Coing and Red Radius, thank you also for the follow. Yes, we're having a nice discussion here. I invite people from left and right to show up on my channel all the time. Rob is the latest conservative who's been kind enough to join us, and so we're having a nice little conversation about BLM. All right, so let's get back to it. Rob, I interrupted you while you were saying something.
Sure, no problem.
Please.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks again, Dylan. Really appreciate you. Yeah, so for example, let's look at something like this. Now, I want you just for a second, if you could, to imagine that a group that's perceived to be on the right, such as the Tea Party, would have something like this. Possibly the most seminal moment, other than the actual horrible death of George Floyd, the biggest moment would probably be his funeral, as far as people that were tuning in and seeing a message that was going on. At that funeral, one of the speakers admitted that security was being ran by the Nation of Islam. This is ran by Louis Farrakhan, who has likened Jews to termites 2 weeks before the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, is a terrible anti-Semite, and is a black nationalist. Now, this went off without an eye being batted. How can Black Lives Matter and these organizations and the people that are kind of at the funeral of George Floyd be endorsing a black nationalist movement? We could see it, what was it, Stone Ridge the other day. We also see black nationalists speaking up in the same terms that's being used by Black Lives Matter. Yet you don't see denouncements or anything from the majority of people that are in this movement.
Okay, so Louis Farrakhan, from what I understand, is a bad dude, just as you laid out. And if he was endorsing, or if he was involved in that, I think that's a bad thing. And I've heard that he is anti-Semitic, as you've laid out. And so, yeah, if that's what if that happened there, that's bad, I guess. I mean, I wouldn't want him associated with me at all, right? Again, though, whoever was in charge of George Floyd's funeral, which I imagine would be his family, that was their decision. Now, like, again, and here's the thing. So I don't know who's where this condemnation is supposed to come from specifically, right? So, like, who is the official spokesperson for Black Lives Matter? This is the problem with assigning some sort of definite leadership here, right? Where you could just say, well, Sean King didn't speak up. I don't know. I don't follow any of these people on Twitter, so I literally can't even say, right? I can't even say. But like, what I do know is that Sean King himself is not Black Lives Matter, right? Or whoever other name you can come up with is not Black Lives Matter. So the fact that BLM, however you want to define it, didn't properly push back against Louis Farrakhan, who deserves pushback, as far as I understand it, then, like, I just don't know what direction that would have come from.
But here's here's why that's fair, and I get what you're saying. But here's the problem: anytime we have a movement on the right, and there's nefarious actions that come with it, we rightfully, the mainstream rightfully calls it out. But we could see action after action, and they're always downplayed. Well, Louis Farrakhan's attached to the funeral of George Floyd. Oh, well, there's no one really to speak up about that. Well, a bunch of people that are considered ideological leaders of BLM have said some really heinous things. Well, that's not BLM entirely. Well, there's been a bunch of riots in the name of BLM. Well, that's not them entirely. Well, in Provo, a Black Lives Matter supporter shot at a person stopped at a traffic sign. Now think about this one for a second. Not only did they attempt murder, did a Black Lives Matter supporter shoot at someone stopped at a sign as they were trying to stop traffic, which in itself is a crime. But then imagine how you would have to be one of these, quote, peaceful Black Lives Matter supporter to watch someone attempt murder, and what did they do? They kept right on marching. Like, this is the kind of things I'm talking about, where we see incident after incident, and at some point we have to say, well, we can't just say it's a disparate movement, so we'll ignore all of that stuff.
Wow. First of all, I'd have to, and I'm not saying that you're trying to use this, like, manipulate this incident, but I would have to see this incident in itself, like, to understand exactly what you're talking about. What we have seen time and time again from these protests are when people are, like, for instance, that one cop who got separated from the rest of the force, right? People surrounded him because others wanted to harass the guy, right? Protesters surrounded him and walked him safely back to the rest of the police force like a lost sheep. We've seen BLM protesters stand against rioters who were trying to loot a store. And those rioters, I would say, I mean, if you want, so I would say those rioters are simply opportunistic criminals, piggybacking off of these current protesters. But you may have seen that differently. But in any case, we've seen protesters, one way or the other, stand against looters trying to rob stores. We've seen them work with cops to find people who've been attacking others. We've seen them deliver bad actors, looters, like physically grab them and take them to the cops. We've seen all of that, right? But you can say, oh, that's anecdotal. Maybe the wider picture it paints something differently. Well, everything you provided me so far is anecdotal. So I think we can both, if that's the case, then we can just cancel this all out.
Well, I mean, I could, if you want, I could provide the links for. I thought this was well known, but like, for example, the situation in Provo that person, they actually arrested that person. There's actual video of it. I could provide all these links.
I can provide links to mine.
Well, I'm not disagreeing, but
this means from a larger.
Well, right, I don't disagree with you. Absolutely, it's one of the first arguments I made that there were a lot of people, particularly at the beginning of this, absolutely people, particularly in the Black community, had absolutely every right to want to peacefully protest and be outraged at the murder of George Floyd. And they should continue to be outraged that I think neither political party has done anything to help them for decades. In fact, I would argue, of course, I'm biased because I'm conservative, but I would argue the Republicans have done nothing. The Democrats have done worse than nothing. They've encouraged bad policy that has made the situation worse. But nonetheless, there's definitely reason to protest. And I said that wasn't it ironic that a lot of these agitators you saw coming in were white? And that you saw Black protesters saying, no, get out of our community. Don't burn down our towns. So absolutely, I'll concede to you that happened. I accept your anecdote because I've seen the exact same video that you have. But that doesn't negate the fact that there are a lot of bad people operating under the banner of Black Lives Matter that are doing the terrible things I'm talking about. And in fact, I could show you video after video, at least 5 off the top of my head, where there's been a situation where you see a bunch of protesters become violent and start beating someone in a mob style, and one of the first things that's yelled by the other, quote, peaceful protesters is, don't record this, don't record this, don't record this. Well, why? Because they don't want it getting out that they tacitly or actually endorse what's going on in these sorts of beatings.
Okay, let's talk about the goddamn cops then. Like, let's actually move on to what this is. Like, the cops, the focus of all this, right, or the main focus of the George Floyd protests, not necessarily the larger Black Lives Matter movement, but the police. We've seen incredible violence from the police, right? We've seen them attack specifically civilians trying to record them, and news reporters doing that while they were alive. We've seen exactly that. We've seen that happen for U.S. reporters. We've seen that happen for foreign reporters. It doesn't matter who they are; they attack them once they see they're being taped, right? So if there's a bad actor, yes, they want to be caught doing the things that they're doing. Yes, I can grant you that, whatever, right? But again, the movement doesn't encourage any of this, right? I don't see, like, where's the directives and where are they coming down to, right? Like, beat up cops when you have the chance to, or if you see someone with a counter protester, kick his ass. Like, where are these directives coming down from? There are people in a large, unorganized, most semi-leaderless movement. There are a large amount of people who are going to have different ideas, do different things, right? I'm not going to agree with all of those things. I guarantee you. I'm sure you could show me video of people doing things that I would absolutely never endorse. In fact, in terms of the looting, which again I would separate from the protesters in general, but you don't. That's fine. I condemn that one way or the other, right? So again, I don't. It seems a little pointless. But I think we should move on to.
Okay, but let me say real quick. It's just ironic, I think, that I'm not saying you specifically, but I hear this type of argument being made a lot. And so the argument that Black Lives Matter wants to endorse is, well, we could look at a video or look at the actions of a few bad cops, which is certainly a minority, and we could say, therefore, we could judge that system. But we can't do that with Black Lives Matter. When we could point to incident after incident after incident of not just people in Black Lives Matter protests doing terrible things, but then a bunch of people celebrating them doing it that are supposedly peaceful protesters or cheering them on or trying to cover for them. We can't judge that group based on those actions. And it just seems to...
No.
Go ahead.
Judge them.
But I mean,
if that makes you feel better, then judge them. I don't care, right? But let's not pretend that BLM is somehow on equal footing as the police, right? Backed by the power of the state, with exclusive right to violence. Like, let's not pretend these two are the same thing, right? So look, they're bad actors. Again, I acknowledge that, right? You want to say that we should judge them, or judge BLM for not the general elite semi-legalist movement for not properly excising these people, then fine, we can do that. Okay, right? But once we're done doing that, let's talk about the police. Let's talk about the cops. Let's talk about the endless brutality that hasn't just started, right? That's been going on for decades since there was a thing called the police, right? Let's talk about the fact that these police came from slave patrols, right? That's where the origins of so many these systems came in place to control African American bodies, right? So we can talk about that. Like, that's what the heart of this movement about. That's the whole point.
Right. It's about going back and talking about crimes that happened decades ago. Again, if we look at the actual data from the Washington Post, there were 15 unarmed blacks shot last year. The data shows that the reason that there's more violence interactions with the police in the black community is because there's more violence that occurs in those inner city communities. Now, we could go through all the data if you want. Now, I'm not saying that proves that somehow that, we should look down on people in the black community or anything like that. I say that data shows to us how much we failed as a country to help out these inner city communities, and how the policies that we've pushed consistently for 60 years, and again, I'm biased, I understand, and I am admitting that I don't think the Republicans have done anything to help, but these policies were from Democrats, from people that were saying, we really care about the inner city. We've pushed the same policies for 60 years, and nothing's changed for the better. And so that's...
Which policies are these? Let's go through them.
Sure. So, for example, war on poverty. Those sorts of policies. Policies that have encouraged sort of this looking back and focusing on history, the idea of grievance culture, the idea of saying that, oh, the system's out to get you, it's racist, we need to provide special help. All of that stuff, I think, has made things markedly worse. For example, we can see that Patrick Moynihan, who was a Democrat in 1962, said that he thought it was a national disgrace that the blacks born in single-parent households out of wedlock was 25%. That number after the war on poverty, which was designed to alleviate that, is now 75%. So it's insanity to keep pushing the exact same policies that have made the situation worse.
Okay. Could it be that the war on poverty? Thank you for the follow, pseudo CIA. Oh, thank you. I follow your channel. I think I talked to you once. Anyway, thank you for being kind enough to follow my channel. Thank you for being here. You're saying that because the quote unquote war on poverty failed, right? Because that was specifically designed to help those who lack resources, right? Which would include many lower income African Americans, and that the fact that poverty wasn't reduced I'm sorry. This is such a confusing argument. So I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
Sure.
Right? So we have single. No,
Go ahead.
okay.
Yeah.
But we have single black mothers, right? And Moynihan says like that's a shame that they're single, right? And then you're saying after a series of governmental actions, there's more single mothers, right?
Yes.
And then in the middle of this, you put the war on poverty, right?
Yes.
And somehow you connect the two single mothers with the war on poverty, which let's not pretend that there's been a continuous series of presidents who've been behind the war on poverty and all the things that have been involved there, right? We've seen throughout history that when there are policies, right, long-term policies that are out there to help minorities, right? There'll be one president who enacts it, who supports it, right? But the next president may not support it, may sabotage it, and then on and on and on, right? So the very fact that the war on poverty itself may not have succeeded, there was a series of policies that didn't do it. Again, I don't know what that means for the larger BLM movement, and I don't know what that has to do with single mothers, right? Like whatever, it has not. The one has nothing to do with the other.
Well, look, like if you look at like a black conservative like Larry Elder, who said when he was growing up in the 60s and these policies started, that there were actual government agents that knocked door to door and said, do you realize if there was only one parent in the household, you would be eligible for government funds? And the idea that this has maybe been put on hold with some politicians, but that's not really what the case when you look at the inner cities that are having the most trouble, because they've been almost exclusively Democrat for years. But I get it. Like, this isn't a discussion. I guess we're sort of getting off in the weeds as to a discussion of Black Lives Matter. My point on this is just that I think that the solution to these problems is different. For example, say what you will about Donald Trump, but employment was going up, particularly increasing, and though it had a lot of work to do, I totally get that, in the African American community under the policies of Trump, and the idea that we should, instead of focusing on race things in the past, that we should try to, as best forward, is just move forward and treat everyone as equal. But it seems that there is a movement, particularly led by BLM, which, by the way, talking about single motherhood, I don't think it's an accident that part of their stated mission is to disrupt the nuclear family. I don't think that that's an accident, because they realize that this is one of the key problems, and I don't think that their policies would actually be beneficial for the black community.
Okay, let's focus in. I'm going to push away this single motherhood thing for later. We can come back to it if you like.
No, that's fine.
I think it's a complete distraction.
Okay.
But previously you were talking about the Democratic. Say that again. The part before the single motherhood. You were talking about policies, including knocking on doors.
Yes. Right. So part of the war on poverty was saying, the idea was, and look, I'm not even saying that it was an idea. I question the motivations of some of the people. I mean, there is an accusation that's never been proven, but it's been in several books, that supposedly Lyndon Johnson said, I'll have these N-words voting Democrat for the next 100 years. I don't know if that's true, but
okay.
certainly it could be. But regardless of the motivation, there was an argument that if we provide single mothers with a bunch of money, that will help solve this.
No. Okay, sorry. No, not the single mother part. I remember what you were talking about previously. I'm sorry, I had a brain fart. You're talking about Trump's economic.
Yeah.
So first of all, if we look at the trend, there's President Bush is in office. There is a massive recession, right? Massive recession, the Great Recession, in fact. Jobs and unemployment plummets, right? President Obama gets in office, puts in reforms, weak reforms, if you ask me, terrible reforms, but he puts in reforms. The unemployment rate rises, and it continues to rise into the Trump administration. Now I'm not even going to take away Trump's policies and say that this was all Obama, right? But I'm just going to say that like it was continuing to rise from the Obama era into the Trump era. But let's say that Trump was a great steward, and it was because of his economic policies that these things continue. Okay, let's talk about the Obama-Trump era unemployment or employment rate, right? This is the same canard that's been pushed on people forever, right? Well, stock market is high and unemployment is low, right? Like everything is good, except we can see from the data that that's not the case. Like people, like the gig economy exploded under Obama and under Trump. People having to get extra jobs, right, or rely on other jobs. I mean, like I don't know, being like on Twitch, right? To try to get income because normal wage work wasn't doing for them, or they could not find that wage work, right? So many people were underemployed, though they were employed but underemployed, not getting enough to support themselves, right? And so, yeah, we had the explosion of this gig economy where people lacked the benefits of being a full-time worker by design by these companies, of course, right? And this is all counted as like an amazing work. When we have freaking this is just one example, right? But like you could see despair building up in these communities. This particularly in as focused on the media in the white community, right? You saw the massive amount of drug use, right? And a massive increase in suicides, right? So that was all happening at the same time, right? Like from Obama's administration into Trump's administration, right? People have been devastated. The economy is not good. Just because those numbers ticked up doesn't mean the people behind those numbers are actually being fulfilled, they're actually being taken care of, that they actually have prospects for the future. When so many people feel that they absolutely don't. Yeah, those numbers by itself mean very little to me. But
okay, yeah. I'm not. There is a lengthy discussion we could have. I'd love to have this discussion with you for a full 2 hours on economic policies and what would be better. I'm merely stating that I think that although you're right that the numbers themselves aren't the exact metric of how well things are doing. In fact, numbers are often cited for the past 30 years when we know that the middle class of all races has been falling behind over and over. So, yeah, I'm merely pointing out the fact that the idea that we have to have this one political party, that their ideas are for the inner city, is not true. That we could see that there are arguments that could be had, that there are different policies, particularly when the same policies for 60 years haven't been doing anything to improve the situation. But I don't think that that's really indicative of a discussion of Black Lives Matter necessarily. I mean, I do think that it's ironic that the majority of people that support Black Lives Matter will end up voting Democrat when they're saying there's systemic racism, and in each of these cities where they are upset about, they've been controlled by Democrats for years. But somehow they'll still continue to vote for that systemic racism.
Okay, so no problem. What are their other options? The other option, the Republican Party. The Republican Party, the party of the Southern strategy, that's the party that we would maybe consider. I don't think so. No, the only option in this nation with its terrible two-party system is to pick one or the other and make that party your own, right? To push that party to change the leadership, right? I agree with you that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are other failures. I have criticized them relentlessly on this channel, right? But let's pretend that there's some other option in the Republican Party. Absolutely not. This Republican Party has no problem, zero problem with the president staying there at the top, dog whistling away, right? To white nationalists, no, thank you. No, sorry, the Black community is not going to fall for that. No, we are not that dumb as to believe that President Trump or the Republicans behind him are any way concerned with the lives of Black people.
I think it's funny that we could say that Trump somehow dog whistles, but we have Joe Biden say, if you're Black and don't...
He just tweeted out that whole video with the dude screaming out white power, and then he pretends like, oh, I didn't even watch the thing. I don't know. He continuously retweets white nationalists accounts, right? He continually retweets that, puts his message out there, right? He continuously downplays white terrorism when it happens, white domestic terrorism, in which you see white individuals killing people of other races, right? He ignores that when it happens, right?
Again,
a brown person who does these things, then he immediately makes sure that you know that you absolutely know what's coming down.
It's just, so, this is constant, like this, the way that this is played, the hypocrisy is hilarious. So, for example, Obama and the Black Caucus literally took pictures and hung out with Louis Farrakhan. Where was all the complaints with Black Lives Matter and the Black community? My goodness, the people were voting for.
First of all, when did it happen? When did it happen? This picture of Louis Farrakhan, right? Was that before BLM was ever even created? And anyway,
yes.
If you come to this channel, right? I criticize President Obama endlessly, and I think actually members of BLM also realize as well. Again, it's not some cohesive movement. Stephen Miller, part of President Trump's White House is literally a white nationalist, him and his fucking wife. If you want to talk about how terrible Joe Biden is, hey, I've done that as well, right? Joe Biden's a fucking wreck. He has forever like tried to push the mass incarceration state, right? No, he's been no friend to the black community. He's been dog whistling away as well. I get that, right? But now there's a choice between a piece of shit and a pile of shit, and I guess I'll have to take the piece of shit. Like that's my only choice here. I wish there was something different.
Okay, but again,
we have Bernie Sanders.
Okay, but again, so you've had a lot. You've gone on for a little while. So yeah, again, right? So we talk about Stephen Miller, the fact that he's a white nationalist is absurd. That's not the case. Just because he advocates for immigration control, which I also advocate for, which coincidentally negatively impacts black families more than white families, but for somehow that gets lost in all the shuffle. But aside from that, again, we're talking about potential dog whistling from Trump when we literally see the Black Lives Matter movement has black nationalists at the funeral of George Floyd. We literally see black nationalists taking pictures with the head of the Democratic Party. We see this racism. Let me read you a little quote. We're talking about dog whistling. Let me read you a quote from Toronto's leader of the founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. You ready? Quote: "Whiteness is not humanism."
Not the founder. He may have been some sort of head of some chapter, some organization.
Right, of Toronto's chapter. Of Toronto's chapter. "Whiteness is not humanist. In fact, white skin is subhuman. All phenotypes exist within the black family, and white people are a genetic defect of blackness. White people have a higher concentration of enzyme inhibitors that suppress melanin. They're genetically deficient because melanin is present at the inception of life. Melanin is directly linked to fertility," and on and on and on. And we see this over and over and over with people connected.
Do we see this over and over again? Do we see this over and over again? Do we actually see this?
Yes,
because what you read to me is some guy, right? Who's
lady.
Like, and again, I will grant you that whoever I will believe you and say that that exactly that happened and exactly that way. That's fine. But again, how does this have to do with a movement of hundreds of thousands, right? How again does this in a semi-leaderless movement like that, organic movement? I don't know what this even means. That's bad. That's a bad thing.
I mean,
right? I don't believe that about white
how would this not be the equivalent of me just being like this, though? Like, well, I'm a Republican and I endorse Republicans. And you say, well, here's bad things Republicans do. And I say, oh, no, I don't endorse that. I just endorse that doesn't mean when the argument is, are we questioning whether the Republicans are good or not? We're showing the actions that people in positions of power and actions that the organization has taken. I repeatedly show actions that are negative that Black Lives Matter has taken. My computer's screwing up. I repeatedly show that the actions they've taken that are negative, including their leaders talking about their leaders talking about white people being subhuman and things like that, and every single time it's, well, that's not the real Black Lives Matter. Then what is the real Black Lives Matter? Where can I go to look at what it really is?
Look at the policies it's actually pushing. Let's talk about the policies, right? The policies is defund the police. That's a good thing. The policies are expanding economic opportunities for African Americans. That's a good thing. The policies are recognizing the whole humanity of people of color, right? Those are the good things. So
right. Okay. So we can see.
And again, you said even previously, right, that you admitted that BLM is not a party like the Black or the Republican Party. That these two things aren't equivalent, as we covered previously, right? So to compare the two, and the cohesiveness of the GOP with this diffuse BLM movement, I think again is not the same. We're comparing apples and oranges here.
Well, I'll agree. That's okay. I'll agree that there's a difference in the comparison, but again, it seems like a cop out that anytime. So all we need is an organization without a declared leader, and they could go around rioting, and they could have people that are leading chapters of it say the most inhuman things and racist things, and they could have black nationalists running funerals of funerals that they're putting on. All that they could be riots. There could be people in Provo, Black Lives Matter, people that are shooting people in Provo, trying to murder them. There could be endless of physical abuse, riots, beating people. We could see this over and over. And every single time it's, well, you can't judge the movement, and that's just a unique individual.
Okay. So let's say Prime here is a member of BLM, right? And Prime here disagrees with black nationalists doing fucking anything, right? Being involved with the protest. What does me be as a concerned individual within the BLM movement? What do I do to stop that from happening? Right? What are the levers I can take, right, to satisfy you to properly show that I have distanced myself from it? I'd love to know.
Well, okay. Here's the problem. The entire focus of Black Lives Matter makes this stuff inevitable because they focus on a racial lens where they look at abuses of the past, which means that people feel justified in these sorts of actions. It's why we see people feeling justified in tearing down statues of Teddy Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln. It's why we see people feel justified in looting because they feel that they've been victimized by this country by sins of the past and therefore that they're allowed to do these things now.
So, hold on. First of all right, I guess we're gonna have to focus in on this for a moment. So I guess this is maybe more of the heart of the matter. Hold on 1 second.
And if I could say real quick,
okay, so
go ahead.
No, so the point is that it seems like you're separating like the sins of the past, right, from the present, which is what I see many conservatives do, right? That there are no grievances, right? There's this grievance. Talking about this grievance culture, right? As of implying that the endless series of racist actions by this nation, by our society, right, either didn't happen or have absolutely no effects on what we see here today. I reject that 100%. I think those grievances, or however you want to call it, right? I think all of those create the present that we are currently experiencing today. If you, in the end, if you think that those things don't affect the present, that they aren't important, right? Well, then, of course, we'll never agree then. Of course, then you'll never see BLM. BLM will seem pointless to you, right? Like, why aren't you, instead of focusing in on more of breaking down the elites, whatever the elites are, right? Why are you focusing on this? Because none of that actually has anything to do with the past. That doesn't shape your lives as it is. So are you saying that the racist, violent past and present of the United States, those two things are completely unconnected to the present and the past?
I'm saying, first off, I'm willing to talk about alleged racism that's occurring currently. Certainly, I'm willing to have that conversation. But I am saying the fact that we look back to things that happened hundreds of years ago or 60 years ago and say that that's an explanation of... Yes, I'm saying that is a mistake. That we could do that, then every group would be able to... why do we only stop 100 years ago? How far back are we willing to go?
We're not. Well, first of all, we're not stopping. We're going back to the birth of the nation. Yeah, we're going that far back.
Why start there? Why start at the birth of the nation?
Oh, we can start before that.
Okay.
The genocide of the Native Americans. Yes, we can start there.
Right. Why stop there? Why not go back further than that? What about, like, for example, the Algonquin tribe that was wiped out by, like, Cherokee tribes? Are we going to go back and talk?
What would that have to do with America?
Because the argument is that somehow that people today should be responsible for sins that happened hundreds of years ago, but it seems to only apply in a specific section. And let me ask you this. Do you think things are worse in many of these inner city communities today than they were during the civil rights movement?
It depends on what you're looking at. It honestly depends.
So slavery is, in many ways, slavery is more impactful and Jim Crow is more impactful today than it was before the civil rights movement.
If you're talking about systems of control of African Americans, right? You specifically said the 60s, so I'll go with
that.
If you're talking about systems of control on African American bodies, oh yeah, we got plenty of those, right? They may not be under the banner of quote unquote Jim Crow, but there are plenty of systems that are controlling the lives of African Americans, that are restricting their movements and limiting their potential. Yeah, we got plenty of those.
Like, so name
talking about, for instance.
So give me like police. That's one of the ones, right, that we're talking about.
Yeah, that's usually the end result, the very end of things, right? But we're talking about the lack of investment in African American communities. We were talking about, for instance, how white families were allowed to flee inner cities during the Great Migration, when African Americans who left the South because of the endless white terror that was happening there, right? When they fled to the north, when they moved to the north in the Great Migration, white families were allowed to flee the inner cities themselves, taking their investments with them, right? The government, that was backed by the government, backed by FHA loans, right? FHA, Federal Housing Administration loans that were specifically allowed to, were specifically not given to Black people. And they fled to suburban complexes that specifically left out African Americans, who not only said African Americans aren't allowed to buy one of these homes, but resales were not allowed to African Americans. So where the white community was able to leave and build wealth through home ownership, right? African Americans were not allowed to do that, and instead were stuck behind redlining districts in which they could not get that same sort of investment in their neighborhoods, right?
Redlining, so real quick, redlining was something that occurred in the past, and yes, it is now illegal. The idea of white flight ignores the fact that we also saw a substantial amount of black flight. For example, from Wikipedia, black flight is a term applied to the migration of African Americans from predominantly black or mixed inner city areas in the United States or suburbs and newly constructed homes on the outer edge of cities. While more attention has been paid to this since the 90s, the movement of black people to the suburbs has been underway for some time, with 9 million people having migrated from 1960 to 2000. Their goals have been similar to those of the white middle class, whose out-migration was called white flight: newer housing, better schools for their children, and attractive environments. From 1990 to 2000, the percentage of African Americans who lived in the suburbs increased to a total of 39%, rising 5% in that decade. So the truth is that there were people of all colors that were fleeing the inner city because the policies that were being directed at the inner city were terrible. So the idea that this was just, okay, so then it's not necessarily a race thing, it was the thing that we had people fleeing of all colors that were going from those communities. And the fact that
So you're misinterpreting what I'm saying here. It's not that, for instance, a single white family leaving the inner city was themselves racist. No, I'm talking about the policy itself was racist and led to racist outcomes that, as you pointed out, other black families are also trying to flee, right? So when you're stuck in these neighborhoods that have been have a critical lack of investment in them, right, where our homes are falling apart because, again, people can't get loans or anything, or can't get good jobs to help fix up their own houses, right? You're stuck in a neighborhood that has poor schools because, of course, schools are tied to property taxes, right? Which is, other countries don't do that because that's a dumb thing to do, right? But since you do all these things add up to poor neighborhoods, right? Yeah, those policies exactly 100% have been terrible, and those things are bipartisan policies that have been put in place.
But this was 1968 redlining end. And so we're saying that things have gotten worse.
It's illegal doesn't mean it doesn't happen anymore. That doesn't mean that, for instance, black homeowners, right? Lots of things are illegal. For instance, not showing black homeowners or black home buyers homes in specific neighborhoods, right? That's illegal. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. In fact, we've seen cases where people are prosecuted about that.
Right, but we see the same with poor white communities. We see the same with poor Asian.
Discriminate against job applicants, right? Based on race, right? But that happens any which way. Like, these things still happen. Yes, it's illegal, but I'm sorry. I wish it didn't. We just have repercussions that we can inflict upon these people if we can prove that happened. But no one's saying it's not happening. In fact, let's talk about that. Donald Trump himself, and the Trump organization, was guilty of exactly the crimes I'm talking about. They were, I believe, sued by the Justice Department or fined by the Justice Department or whatever, because of not showing homes to African American or rental properties to African Americans. Like, that happened within the Trump administration. So yeah, it's illegal, but it still happens.
Yeah, well, it happens to people of poor people of color of all types. And also, there's also a discussion that's left out in this about the actual insane amount of violence that's going on in those communities. Now, I get that shouldn't mean that we should still make redlining illegal and that it's still immoral, but we do leave out the other side of that equation. And the idea that all of this is directed back to, why is it then that all of these racist policies ended up not affecting people of color that are other people of color that were also affected and lived in these inner cities, such as places like Nigerian Americans, places like Asian Americans? If it's such a white supremacist system, why are these groups doing better than whites on almost every measure? Do we really think that the police could identify the difference between a Nigerian and an African American whose ancestry went through Jim Crow?
Okay. Maybe I missed it. So, are you saying that just because we have certain Africans, right, coming from certain backgrounds, who are maybe doing better than the larger African American community, right? Because that's happening, that systemic racism isn't a thing? Is that what you're implying?
I'm saying that if it's true, for example, in the law enforcement discussion, that cops have this implicit bias because of systemic racism that makes them have more negative relationships with African Americans, why wouldn't we see that play out in other communities of people of color, such as Nigerian Americans?
First of all, so I'm sorry, you have there's maybe something I'm missing, but do you have a study?
Let me
showing that Nigerians. Please, I love to see it. But in any case, right? That doesn't, just because Nigerians, right? And let's take everything you're saying at absolute face value. But Nigerians are coming from a different. Recent immigrants are coming from a different historical background and have different outcomes.
Right, but that wouldn't explain interactions with the police, right? That shows that these interactions with the police, it's not based on skin color, that it's based on something else, like socioeconomics.
Oh, sorry, I need a source. I need a source that's saying that Nigerians specifically are exempt from police violence.
There's one that, so that's the first one I could find that's just about the successful nature of Nigerian Americans, how they're the most successful ethnicity, but I'll try to find the actual police numbers.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to see that. Okay, so Nigerians, you guys can click on that if you like. The most successful ethnic group in the U.S. may surprise Nigerians. Okay. Again, so I'll have to be shown that there is proof that cops are specifically not. There's some big difference between Nigerians and the larger African American population in that case. And if there was, the only thing I could think of would be if there is educational and economic differences between the Nigerians and the larger African American population, right? That would mean that, as progressives have been saying the entire time, that these things work on multiple axes, right? So there could be a race and socioeconomic factors playing into both of these things, right? That people who live in wealthier neighborhoods, for instance, and again, I haven't seen the study you're talking about, but people who live in wealthier neighborhoods are less likely to be harassed, right? They are less policed than those in other neighborhoods. So if these Nigerians are doing as well as this article seems to be applying that they are, well, then that would imply that they are in a different socioeconomic class, meaning their interactions with the state will be different.
Right, but again, that would explain that. Then we're talking about socioeconomic things and not just police being, oh, there's someone who looks dark, I'm going to treat them differently than someone who doesn't look dark. Again, it's because the situation.
I'm not going to let that go. I'm going to have to see a source in that one.
All right, I'll find the source. That
one, that would be astonishing to me. If that played out as you were saying. Again, and I also don't want to let it go. Hey Kurt, thank you for joining us. You seem again to be separating the sins of the past from the sins of the present. And I don't know, where was the break? Please tell me, where was the break where racism was no longer a thing that affected African Americans? What date was it, so that I can go back, check my calendar? I must have missed that part.
Well, again, the same thing could... See, this is what happens. So because we focus on that in the history, we're looking at African Americans as a group. So I'll ask you a question that I asked someone recently. Let's say that we have two people. We have Bob, who's a black gentleman, and we have Will, who's a white gentleman. And they're both... Bob's family went through Jim Crow and slavery, and because of that, he's born in a terrible situation where he has a single mother who makes $30,000 a year. Will didn't go through Jim Crow. Let's just say he grew up in rural America, His family, his grandparents worked at mills that closed down. He's born into a tragic situation where he's born to a single mother that makes $30,000 a year. Why is it that all of a sudden wouldn't both of their situations be analogous? Wouldn't it be that we should say, how do we focus on people in poverty and lifting them out of poverty? Why is the racial focus in that context necessary?
Okay, so if we're talking about, so is Bob the one in the rural area? Is he white?
Bob black, Will white. That's why I chose Bob and Will. Bob's black, Will's white.
And Will grew up in the inner city. Is that
Will is white, grew up in rural America. Bob is black, grew up in the inner city.
Okay. Sorry, I got this.
No problem. I apologize.
No problem. So the again, and this is the part where I feel like it's probably very frustrating to have to continue to explain, right? Right now, the BLM protest is talking about a very specific set of interactions that have to do with systemic racism, right? That's saying that these specific people are affected in these specific ways that create these specific outcomes, right? It's not saying that white individual in the rural area, right? That poor white individual isn't suffering, and and the movement takes nothing away from them. And in fact, if you actually ask most of these people, if you ask most people involved in the BLM movement, they would say that poverty in general is a problem. And like I said previously, these things work on multiple axes, right? So it's not just race, right? Which is why, like, if it was just race, then thank you for the host. Thank you, beautiful Hannah. If it was just race, then you would see all whites being successful, right? Like at least in the middle class and above, right? Like whites would have no economic problems in this country, right? Because we'd have a permanent underclass, right? And because you're not the right color, that means one, you can't rise, and two, that white people can't fall. But that's not the case. There are plenty of destitute white people. In fact, there are more by the raw numbers. There are more white people in poverty than there are people of color in poverty, right? But if you're talking about percentages of their specific populations, then yes, more people of color in poverty than by percentage than white people. So that switches that way.
Okay,
but hold on. No, there's a social-economic element to this. So yes, that white individual that you painted in that rural town, yes, he is having trouble. He's having struggles, right? And we want the best for him too. This specific conversation is talking about black people, but that doesn't mean that we don't care about white people.
But again, that's not how it's playing out. I just read you one of the chapter leaders of BLM Toronto talking about how whites are subhuman. We see that the biggest book in the country right now is called White Fragility. We see the argument that white people have original sin and they should be held responsible by their ancestors. This isn't an off-color, like an off comment that one or two people are saying that. This is indicative of what we see occurring right now in this country. We see that people like Abraham Lincoln, who was the party of emancipation, the president of emancipation, claims to have him pulled down. We see that the statue, Mount Rushmore, claims for it to be pulled down. This has to do with...
Hold on. That statue of Lincoln, the one that we're talking about, unless you're talking about a completely different one that I'm unaware of, the statue of Lincoln that we're talking about is him standing over a black man still in chains, kneeling in front of this white man, right? As if, oh, thank you, dear white man. Thank you for being my savior. Yeah, that's a fucked up statue. Fuck that. Pull that shit down. Fuck that. Throw in the river. Like, fuck, that was unnecessary. Like, instead, if you want to send a message of racial improvement, right? What you could have done is had a statue with Abraham Lincoln shaking the same man's hand, even if he's still in chains, like him standing up on equal terms with them. They're recognizing the intense racial messages that are being sent by that statue. So yeah, whatever. Like, it's not about Lincoln himself. It's about that specific statue being terrible. Not that the statues even fucking matter. I say destroy every fucking statue. Like, I don't even give a shit at all, right? Destroy all of them. You want to just throw away MLK statues? Fine, do that. I don't give a shit. I don't care at all.
Right, 100%. But it's easy to not care when you have all the institutional power on your side cheering for Black Lives Matter, saying...
Is it?
Yes.
All the institutional power.
Name one that's not. Name one that's not.
When Donald Trump in that speech previously said that if anyone pulls down a statue, right, or damages a statue, they can get 10 years in prison. So all the institutional power
They should get
one
10.
black
Well, I would say 95% of the institutional power. In fact, politics is just one area of institution. But yes, they should get that length of time. I find it that, again, because of things that happened in the past, we have to blame everything that occurs now on this racism of the past. This is called racism of the gaps, where we just say, oh, if there's some kind of discrepancy in statistics, it must be racism. For example, if we look at the Bureau of Justice statistics, we could see that actually that there are a lot of complicated factors that could go into law enforcement and their engagement with the black community. For example, if we want to talk about discrepancies, we can see the discrepancy between men and women is bigger than the discrepancy between whites and blacks. Yet I don't see a big national movement calling law enforcement bigoted against men or anything like that. And it's because this is about tearing down what the United States was founded on, the culture of the United States.
Form your own movement. If you want a movement to be pushing for men's rights, then wait a minute, there is a movement for that, and you can join that movement. And you
sure, it's a huge. I remember all the protests and riots, and I remember all the corporations, and I remember all the politicians, and all of academia and Silicon Valley and the entertainment industry all endorsing Men Lives Matter. Oh wait, no, that didn't happen. And again, if Black Lives Matter, if you say, well, they're actually concerned about all things, if the reason that we need a specific group focused on race, such as Black Lives Matter, is because supposedly the discrepancy in the statistics between police interaction and incarceration shows that racism must be the culprit, why is there total silence from all of those people when it comes to the fact that the discrepancy between men and women is much greater than that between black and white?
Because we're focusing on race. This is it. We're focusing on the black experience, right? If, again, you want to make your own movement about the other thing, you can do that, right? And look, and to pretend that, like, African Americans have always had this sort of a support, right? This is this is just the way it is with blacks start marching and then people start supporting. No, and the institutional power, as we can see, being used against them by the violent, thuggish actions of the police. Yes, that is the state, right, using its levers of power through the violent, thuggish actions of the police against African Americans, right? That is an example, a plain example of the state not being on the side of African Americans. It happens all the time.
But that's outrageous to say that it's the state intentionally. For example, like, again, let's look at the Bureau of Justice statistics. Like, I could bring them up. I've done this argument hundreds of times. Like, for example, we could see, this means on average, blacks are 2.25 times more likely to commit violence than whites. This also happens to be the exact amount more, almost the exact amount more, that blacks are likely to be shot by police. Something that's not a coincidence. Now let's look at the total populations of whites. 171 million, population of blacks 33 million. You're correct that that most crimes with ethnicities occur within the racial group black on black, white on white. But when comparing black on white compared to white on black, it's clear that black on white's far more common. And when you go through the numbers, you find out that blacks are 48 times more likely to commit violence against whites than vice versa. In fact, blacks are the only group that are specifically listed that are more likely to be a perpetrator of a violent crime than a victim. 2-to-1. Now, I'm not saying that to say, this proves that the black community is racist or anything like that. I'm saying we need to look into why these numbers occur. But to say, the fact that policing's there proves racism is absurd. And it's not all blacks. It's these specific inner city communities. Go ahead.
Yeah. So poverty breeds crime, as we see in any impoverished community around the world. Those in poverty have to commit more crime because that's the way it works, especially within a capitalist system. The laws are designed to protect private property. And so, for instance, if you steal food, just for an example, because you can't feed you and your family, well, then, that's a crime in our system.
These stats are about violent crime, not about stealing food.
Well, hold on, but you can do violence to within a crime desperation, certainly, correct? Right?
Yeah.
Just because someone used violence doesn't mean they weren't desperate, right? In fact, that might mean they're more desperate, correct?
Right, but that still's not an excuse for violence.
Well,
what about rape?
That's not an excuse for violence. Hold on. Okay. Did I say it's an excuse for violence?
No.
I'm just saying that poverty breeds crime, right? Yes, we can talk about exactly that poverty that breeds that crime. We can talk about, again, the lack of investments in these communities, the lack of jobs, the lack of access to public transportation to go to
and all those conversations, all those conversations are fine, but that does not prove that law enforcement is racist. Right? Then you're saying the reason. So you're conceding.
That's a different conversation. That's two different conversations. You're putting them together. I didn't put them together.
But that's the point. If you say, if you concede, just real quick, if you concede, well, yes, of course these crimes occur because of systemic poverty, because of racism. Okay, then it's not a problem with law enforcement, because law enforcement's interactions and use of violence within the black community is almost directly proportional to the amount of violent crime that they commit. And so, okay, fine. Then maybe there's a problem with systemic racism. We need to talk about other issues. That is not what Black Lives Matter is focused on. They're focused on law enforcement. In fact, they're focused on law enforcement, which again killed 15 unarmed black people last year, and they're basically silent on the 7,000 or so blacks that were murdered in black on black crime.
No, sir, I will never let you or anyone else do that on my channel. I will never let it, because this whole thing about silencing the black community, about black on black crime, that is utter bullshit. And it would never been silent. The black community through decades have been marching and organizing and fighting for resources to actually deal with the violence in their community. That's been an ongoing, endless struggle, right? That's been happening behind the scenes. But white people who want to use those stats against black people without actually giving a shit about what happens to black people, will throw that in their face. Oh, look at all the black crime that's happening in your neighborhoods. No, absolutely not. I will never let that stand. Black communities have always been marching against that. It's
not even. It's
things, right? But the people who use this stat don't give a shit. They don't.
That's outrageous. It's the exact opposite. Black Lives Matter does not care. They don't care. They don't care about the homeless.
It's focused on systemic racism against the African American population, right? It's focusing on the system that breeds that poverty, that breeds that wealth disparity, that breeds all of that, right? That creates those conditions that results that in the end results in that violence, right? So we're trying to dismantle that whole system, and that's the American system you're talking about. Goddamn right, we're trying to.
All right, see, so that, and again, and so we can see what the policies that do that sort of thing lead to. For example, homicides are up almost 125% in most major cities across the country. I'm not going to say that exact number, but I know, for example, in New York, Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, places like that, where homicides are going up. Atlanta is another one. Why? Because the narrative of defund the police and destroy these institutions of police, these policies of these suggestions directly lead to more homicides in the inner city black community. And it's ironic that of course, Black Lives Matter is focused on that.
Please, your sources.
Yep.
And give me this correlation, right? This causation that, again, that simply talking about defund the police without actually defunding the police leads to more crime. That simply that idea in the air leads to more crime. I'm definitely going to have to
right. Like, for example, we could see direct implication in Atlanta, where police started calling off because of the situation with Rashard Brooks.
The Washington Examiner. Okay.
No, how many of these do you want me to put up? I could probably put like a dozen up if you want me to put of the homicide rates going up ever since we've seen the protests that have started. But I'm sure that that'll just be a coincidence. It turns out that talking about defunding and demoralizing the police doesn't actually have... how about the Chaz zone that didn't have police? How'd that work out?
Wait a minute, hold on. So I actually, you talked about, and did you put something else in chat that I missed? Okay, hold on, let me look at that as well. Because what you just gave me is not at all what... Oh, thank you for the follow. Homicides up 250% in the first week of June. Okay, let's take a look at that. With more people, this is from the LAPD. Let me play, isn't it? Hold on, let me I'm sorry, I gotta pause this.
No problem. I think it's...
I hate those videos that automatically play.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it just really annoys me. Hold on, let's switch to browsing. Okay, let's take a look at this. Homicides up 250% in the first week of June. So, with more people venturing out into reopening businesses and restaurants, Los Angeles crime has skyrocketed in the first week of June. A tweet from the LAPD has said between May 31st and June 6th, homicides were up 250% compared to the... Dude. So, a tweet from the LAPD right here says between May 31st and June 6th, homicides were up 250% compared to the previous week. The number of victims has shot up and jumped 56% in the same week. When in the previous paragraph it says, with more people venturing out and reopening businesses and restaurants. With more people, there are more people out, so there will be more crime. Crime was down because people were inside. So now there's more crime.
The numbers
people are outside.
The numbers are up from a year-to-year basis in what we're seeing despite the lockdown in many of these cities.
Let's take a look. The increase in violence has continued into this week. LAPD says several people were shot, one killed. Okay. 2 of the incidents were believed to be gang-related. Okay, and it lists those. Immediately after stay-at-home orders were issued across the LAPD chief, compared to the 20%. Okay. Oh, sorry. Did I click? Okay. Oh, sorry. I apologize. So he's 20. Los Angeles sees 23% drop in crime. LAPD says Chief Morris. What? Okay. Is this? Hold on. Going back to this thing. LAPD Chief Moore said crime had dropped 23% compared to the same time last year. Police did not say if the increase in crime was related to easing coronavirus participation or recent protests. I'm sorry, this thing keeps fucking playing. I apologize for that. So the police don't say. They say there was a drop in crime, right, in that previous period, and then there was an increase in crime. It didn't say anywhere here about last year in the comparison of the two. But 23% compared to that time last year, a drop compared to last time. Am I incorrect? Am I reading this wrong? Right here. Immediately after stay-at-home orders were issued across the state, the police chief said there was a 23% drop in crime compared to the same time last year. Right here. That's in the source that you provided me.
The sources that show that we have an increase in homicides after these protests have started. Now, I understand that.
No. It shows even in the source. It says people were home, businesses reopened, and then there was an increase in crime. It didn't say anything about that. It says.
Right, I understand what the media is going to say, that they're going to say, oh, there's other explanations.
You provided me with that source.
Right, I said the data showed that homicides are up. I don't care what they're interpreting. Oh, it's up because of coronavirus. The homicides go up. There's studies on this. For example, we could see, here's an NPR article from 2016 that talks about the Ferguson effect. And when we have these mass protests supposedly against police brutality and racism, that homicide goes up. There's a study that was done on this, which I'm not going to be able to find it tonight. I have it saved somewhere in my files, that predicted that there were, because of the Black Lives Matter protests we saw around 2016, that was responsible for almost 4,000 additional homicides that occurred in places like Baltimore, other places like that. Because what happens is police say, fine, we just won't go into these inner city communities. And as a result, we see what happens when they don't go. We could see it in this week in Atlanta. Look at that Wendy's. Why were there so many people shot? Did you see it where the 8-year-old girl was shot?
No. First of all, let's go back, because you brought up Atlanta previously saying there's some rise in crime, okay? And you still have not provided me a source about that. You gave me a source about Los Angeles.
You read one.
You specifically brought up Atlanta, so I didn't do that. You did.
Right, I said that it's around. Go ahead, sorry.
No. But I'll just finish this. But no, you brought up Atlanta, and then I said, sure, okay, fine. Let me see a source on that. And also this whole thing about Nigerians, so that's been lost in ether as well. But I haven't seen a source for that either. You're talking about.
I mean, the Nigerian thing, it's just, I will find you. I understand how your chat works, and I understand this, that people will say, oh, we demand to see evidence for everything or else it's racist. That no evidence needs to be provided for the side of everything is racist, therefore we need to tear down. I get it. I get that. I can provide.
That, then I can. I have sources. Then we
can okay, sure. Show me the source that shows that, for example, blacks are shot 2.5 times more because of racism.
Hold on. First of all, you're making that claim right there. Bring out some stat. I didn't put that claim, so I'm not gonna have to.
Isn't that what's going? Isn't that what the protest of Black Lives Matter is about?
Hold on. No, first of all, Black Lives Matter is much more than the deaths of African Americans. In fact, I even mentioned that when I was making those statements previously about like the goals of Black Lives Matter. It's not simply the deaths at the hands of the police, right? This is a canard that's used again and again on the right. No, it's not just about people being murdered, but it's a lot about that, right? That's what kicked off these current protests, right? But Black Lives Matter is much more than that. It's the totality of the Black experience, right, within this racist country. Like, there are many systems that come into play that interfere with the lives of African Americans, that limit our potential, that limit literally the amount of time we're allowed to live, right? All these things work together. So it's much more than that. But if you want to stick with the police, we can stick with the police. That's no problem. We don't want to expand this. That's okay. We can stick with the fact that police continuously harass African Americans, right?
Can you prove that? Can you prove it's because of racism?
Oh, well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the sources.
Sure.
Sure.
So we're off of it. We're ignoring the Bureau of Justice statistics that say things like blacks commit this they're the only group that's identified that actually commits more violent crime than they're victims of. We're ignoring the fact that they're individual black person's 48 times more likely to commit violence on a white person than vice versa. We'll ignore all that. Now, moving on. We're moving on to why the police are racist for wanting to deal with it.
It doesn't have to do. So, hold on. No, sorry. This is the wrong one. Does all that, and let's say every single one of that, everything that you said is true, right? What does all that have to do with stopping a young black kid walking through his neighborhood? What does that have to do with stopping a kid, right? And harassing him, throwing him up against the wall, searching him, just cut?
Because this isn't happening in communities where this violence isn't endemic. Right? So, for example, in my community, there aren't blacks that are just being really pulled over like this because there's not this endemic violence that's occurring in the community. Now, does that make it right? No. But the idea that we just have to shout, well, this is racism. So now the idea that we need to destroy the structures of the United States is because I think I saw a CNN statistic that said that blacks were 10% more likely to be pulled over by whites when it comes to things like speeding tickets. So destroy the country, right? Now, never mind that a lot of the traffic agencies said that actually those numbers were backed up by the fact that they felt that blacks actually were more likely to commit those sorts of violations, like not wearing a seatbelt and stuff like that. Again, this stuff isn't a huge deal, but we're told, okay, once we have to get away from the fact that only 15 unarmed blacks were shot last year, and we have to say it's more about other police interactions. It's not just about the deaths. And so, again, is that commiserate with the suggestion that you're offering, which is we need to dismantle this country? Damn right we need to destroy the institutions. We need to destroy these systems. And for what? And again, it ignores that we could see that in many ways, there's a lot of other things that other groups are targeted for, like privilege goes in a lot of ways. So for example, if whites were 48 times more likely to attack blacks than vice versa, you could damn well believe there'd be riots on the street, people talking about how it's unsafe to be black because whites are out hunting blacks. But all of our institutions won't breathe a word about that fact, and we just have to say, we just have to pretend that doesn't exist. Now, I don't want to focus on the racial nature of this. I think that it's a huge mistake. And I think the evidence is pretty damn clear that the more we focus on this and the demonizing of police as systemically racist, all that does is lead to conversations about defunding the police or the Ferguson effect, which leads to thousands of more African Americans dying. And as you yourself admitted, Black Lives Matter, they're not focused on those thousands of interracial homicides. They're focused on systemic racism. And so by focusing on the 15 deaths instead of the 7,000 deaths that occur every year.
So good. So according to the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting data for 2016, 90.1% of black victims of homicide were killed by other blacks, while 83.5% of whites were killed by other whites. While no life is inconsequential, the statistical evidence shows that just as for blacks, when it comes to black on black crime, whites are mostly victimized by other whites, with the vast majority of white murders committed by whites. This is because most victims of crime personally know their assailants, and while this is a truth across racial boundaries, no one ever talks about white on white crime. Interesting. Furthermore, the Bureau of Judicial Statistics arrest data analysis tool shows that less than 1% of blacks overall, about 2% of black men, commit a violent crime in any given year. This means, factoring interracial violent crimes, 99% of black men do not commit black on black crime. Yet, it's not that 99% aren't harassed by the police. And I can provide the source that I'm reading from.
But that's all true. The Bureau of Justice statistics back that up. But again, what is the percentage? How many blacks are harassed by police a year?
Let's look. Hold on. Well, first of all, I put in some sources into the chat. I'm not sure if you caught all that. I'm not sure where you're looking. But against police violence or analyzing police violence against African Americans and showing that there's a greater use of force against them. Household poverty and non-fatal. So there's another one too here as well. This one is talking about how people in poor households in general are more likely to commit crime.
Right. So poverty, got it. Here. Right.
So, yeah.
I mean, again, I'll link the Bureau of Justice statistics. I'll put them on the chat right here. And we could go through. This is the most recent year, 2018. We could go through it. I mean, the most striking statistics is, again, you talk about, I agree that most crime is interracial. So there's more white on white crime and more black on black crime. But again, we're told about how systemically racist the country is and that there's an endemic of white people being racist towards black. But actually, the Bureau of Justice numbers show that black people are 48 times more likely to commit violence on white than vice versa. In fact, if we go down, so I posted the chat there.
So is the police? Are the police? Okay, let's focus in on this, right? So this is the part that you're focusing on blacks committing crimes against whites, right?
Well, no, that's just part of
that.
Yeah.
Is that the reason that the police are harassing African Americans? Is that the reason to protect whites against blacks? Is that what they're stepping in for in a country where we are mostly segregated?
No, that's why. But that's the entire point. The reason that the cops are more involved is not because of the skin color. It's because of these communities. That's why there isn't data that shows that there's a lot of police shootings of blacks that don't live in these particular inner city communities. The vast majority of this is gang violence. In fact, I think it's a huge mistake to lump, what ends up happening is we lump all black people as they're monolithic. That's not true at all. It's hard to find the data that's done specifically by area, like geographic location. But my guess is we'll find out that, guess what? A black that lives in the suburbs or a rural area probably is almost equally likely to commit violent crime as a white person. But those blacks aren't dealing with the intense pressures and the shootings that we see from police that occur in these inner city areas. And so the fact that we just say, well, this is all racism from law enforcement is nonsense. There's violent. Here's the difference. A cop that's going to work in my town every night, they say, I hope I get back in time tonight to watch the basketball game. A cop that suits up to go to inner city Chicago says, I hope that I make it home alive today. For example, we see that there are more cops shot and killed every year in the line of duty than there were unarmed blacks killed last year. But instead, we just say, ACAB, all cops are bastards. We need, blue lives don't matter. Blue lives murder. My governor, Tom Wolf, broke his own lockdown order for COVID to attend a Black Lives Matter protest to get a photo op next to a person holding a sign that says Blue Lives Murder. I mean, this is not helpful. And again, the data doesn't lie that as a result of this, anytime we have police pull back and things like that, it leads to increased homicides. But those homicides are overlooked by the majority of Black Lives Matter because it can't be used to achieve political power, which is what the message is. It's about destroying institutions.
So you're looking for someone else put this in chat. Very helpful. Looking for more evidence of large-scale racial bias. I'll relink the doc. I'll put it right here in chat in case you missed it. But thank you, Polar's World, for putting this information into the chat. It's very useful. But this is a large meta document leading to other studies, I believe, that show exactly the things that I'm talking about. And in fact, some of these things I've already put in chat. It's nice. It's a really this is showing racial differences in different areas in life in terms of implicit bias, in terms of hold on, let me screw up and see all the sections here. Institutional racism in terms of stops, searches, and arrests, all these things. Okay. And based on how the justice system treats these people. So this is actually very helpful. Thank you, Paul, as well, for this. But for instance, you can just start at the top of this document, right? Talking about how you brought in Ferguson, one of your sources that you sent to me. It was which one was it? Drug arrest. No, that's that one. You sent me. Oh yes, okay. You sent me a Washington Examiner document about 80 somehow Ferguson being involved in this. But we can compare these two, right? Um, God, I'm like I have no idea. I have so many fucking tabs open. I have no idea where anything is. I apologize. But it says between 2012 and 2014, Black people in Ferguson accounted for 85% of vehicle stops, 90% of citations, and 93% of arrests, despite comprising 60% of the population. Blacks were more than twice as likely as whites to be searched after traffic stops, even after controlled for related variables, though they were proved to be 26% less likely to be in possession of illegal drugs or weapons. Between 2011 and 2013, Blacks also received 95% of jaywalking tickets and 94% of tickets for failure to comply, whatever that fucking means. The Justice Department also found that the racial discrepancy in speeding tickets increased dramatically when researchers looked at tickets based on only an officer's word versus tickets based on objective evidence, such as a radar. Black people facing similar low-level charges as white people were 68% less likely to see those charges dismissed in court. More than 90% of the arrest warrants stemming from failure to pay / failure to appear were issued for Black people. So this is just one example of one very small city in Missouri, I believe, showing how the justice system treats African Americans differently. Were African Americans simply jaywalking far more than white people do? Is that not a thing that white people do? Except that, but Blacks receive 90% of the jaywalking tickets. Is that not a thing that white people do? Like, am I unaware of how the white community always follows traffic laws? Am I incorrect in that?
I would assume that white people also jaywalk. I have no evidence, neither did this study, that the proportion of jaywalking more likely to be committed by a black person than a white person. I have no clue. Is it possible that there was some sort of implicit racism that went into it? Of course.
There's 95% more likely. You think 95% of jaywalkers.
If you would let me finish my point, of course, maybe there is something that was going on where people were more likely, the police were more likely to do this. But maybe it had nothing to do with race. Maybe it was that the police were focused on specific areas more than others because there was more crime occurring in those specific areas. And so they also happened to catch more people that were doing nonviolent crime. That could be a possibility. That's not systemic racism. Police have more of a presence in places where there's more violent crime, so they're more likely to charge people with crimes that are nonviolent as well. I don't know. But again, all this just says racism. And again, it doesn't give specific, it just says, well, the data proves that it's somehow racism. But again, if we're going to play that game, the data also proves that there is more violent crime committed by the black community. Now, you do the right thing and I'm with you on this. When we see that data, we say, okay, what are the reasons that there's more violent crime? I agree. We should be looking at those reasons and trying to figure out how to best solve why there is more violent crime in these inner city black communities. But we don't do the same when it's data that goes against the police or data that could somehow be used to suggest racism. And again, I have a study from Harvard from 2016 from a black professor who sought to prove...
Yes, let's talk about it. You're talking about Roland J. Fryer,
sure,
correct?
Yes.
Am I incorrect in that? Yes, Roland J. Fryer. I have a article right here that proves that Roland J. Well, it goes into the fact that Roland J. Fryer did a very poor study. The specific flaws of Roland's. So if you can click on, I can just bring this up. Hold on, I'll just bring it up in chat.
Let me see.
1 second. I put it in chat, but I'll also bring it up for the rest of the audience to see as well. 1 second, guys. Let me just turn off my camera right here.
But again, I want to reiterate that we're now talking about jaywalking tickets to destroy the United States of America. I just want to reiterate that's where we're at.
No. That's just one example. We can talk about more. That was.
Do you think that there would be Do you think there would be a problem? So let's look, for example, at the Bureau of Justice statistics. Let's look. Where did I put these? So for example, if we could find the entire.
No. You talked about Roland Fryer.
Okay.
You talked about that Harvard study,
sure,
which conservatives love to bring up.
Sure.
No, let's talk about exactly that study. He's an economics professor who recently published to this done in 2016.
Where's the link to this so I could read it as well?
No, yeah, I put it in chat. That's the last link I put in my chat.
Thank you.
Did you not see it?
I gotta find it here.
Yeah, I'll take your time. But I have it up on the screen as well. Roland Fryer, an economics professor at Harvard University, recently published a working paper at NBER on the topic of racial bias in police shootings. Paper got a lot of attention because of that. Roland Fryer says the most surprising results of his career. However, Fryer's analysis is highly flawed. It suffers from major theoretical and methodological errors. I'm sorry, I can't talk about that. And he has communicated the results to the news media in a way that is misleading. While there have been problems with the quality of police shootings data, there is still plenty of evidence to support a pattern of systemic, racially discriminatory use of force against Black people in the United States. And then it goes into a very long breakdown here, which I'm not sure if anyone wants to hear me say, but I can go through this if you like. And then it also provides two studies at the top that also talk about that reanalyze Fry's data that and how it understates racial bias, and another one that's does another through a statistical simulation. So there are two studies attached to this analysis refuting Fryer's work. So you can go through that. I mean, I can go through the whole thing if you want, but I imagine the audience is not.
Right. And look, when you start to, I've read these studies and I understand what their criticisms are. So they're saying things like, well, actually, if policing is racist and pulls blacks over more than whites, that would explain some of this discrepancy. That does not dispute the evidence that he gives that actually, that if you were an unarmed white versus an unarmed black, that the data does show that the unarmed white was slightly more likely to be shot than the unarmed black. What these studies do is say, yes, but there are other reasons that could be behind that. But we would expect to see that the numbers would be catastrophic, that unarmed blacks are being killed at a record clip, and that's just not true. And again, we could go through this study piece by piece if you want at a later date. But like, let's look, for example, at if we look at, for example, at the crimes, we have for all the amounts of violent incidents that occurred, violent victims in the Black community in 2018 were 563,940. Violent incidents in the white community were 3.5 million, etc. But what we actually see is that there was more black on white crime, or almost the exact same amount of black on white violent crime as there was black on violent crime in the Black community as a whole. And so again, the argument that all of a sudden, with all of this violence that's endemic in the Black community, that this proves racism of law enforcement. My only point is this: if you want to have a discussion on are there reasons that this violent crime is more endemic, that's fine. But what are police officers supposed to do? They're just supposed to say, oh, well, the murders that are occurring in these communities.
I will tell you what police officers are supposed to do. Let's go through what police officers are supposed to do. What police officers are supposed to do is they're not supposed to assault African Americans who are not resisting arrest, right? What the police officers are supposed to do are they're not supposed to pull over African Americans more times than or more often than they pull over people from other races, right? What they're not supposed to do is murder.
What do you mean they're not supposed to? They're not supposed to under any circumstance? If the African Americans are committing,
hold on, I said they're not supposed to harass you didn't let me finish anyway, but kill people who aren't resisting arrest. We aren't supposed to beat the crap out of them. You're talking about showing videos of Black Lives Matter doing some nebulous thing. Well, I can show you police who are supposed to be better than the general population. Since we give them the exclusive use of violence in our culture, people who are supposed to be of a professional nature, right? Using extreme violence against people who are not resisting at all, right? They're not supposed to do any of that. And then when they spot other officers doing that, they're supposed to interfere. They don't do any of that.
Right, okay, so, bad cops are bad, and everyone, 95% of the country was totally on board with going after the guy that killed George Floyd. Everyone was in agreement with that. Everyone, even before the Black Lives Matter movement, there were people that were talking about problems with police brutality and the need to fix it. But the hyper-racialized focus of it, led by a group that is supporting people like Louis Farrakhan, that has people like the Toronto leader that I just showed you, that talks about white people being inferior, that says that we want to tear down the institutions of this country, that has people like Colin Kaepernick saying that this country is endemic with white supremacy and therefore we shouldn't celebrate the 4th of July. And that's fine. That's what I really, and I'm glad, because that's what I really wanted to get out of this debate, because one of the misunderstandings that we have is there are a lot of people that say, oh, Black Lives Matter is not about tearing down the institutions of this country. It's not about saying that the country is systemically racist and wanting to tear all of the history and the culture of it down. And I'm glad you've admitted that that is in fact the case. And so we could see now where we're at right now is, well, because of parking tickets and things that occurred 200 years ago, we need to do...
Again, hold on, no, stop. No, stop. You're being dishonest. You're being dishonest here. I gave you a whole document and talking about all the ways that police harass African Americans. A very long document, looking at many studies, right? I simply pointed out the whole jaywalking thing. Now you are making this entire focus of what I said. That's plainly not the case. You know that. We can go back. If you want to focus in on something else, we can go back to that document. I can give you something else to focus in on. But jaywalking was not the focus of any of this. That is not where you are at in this conversation. That's where you are at, but I am not there. Let's we can go through the document if you want. You need something else to focus on. That's no problem. We can do that.
Again, all you're doing is reading, like, and see. So I'm assuming you went through all these studies, right? You went through all these studies, right? You went through all these studies, right?
I went all through the studies that I showed. The last one that polls where was
no. You read an overview of the study.
Listen. I did not go through the document that polls provided. However, the ones that I provided, I actually did. Yes, I did for a previous debate on police violence. I did go through those studies.
But which one was that?
All the ones before the last one, I'm going to say. There was I put a whole bunch of links in chat. If you scroll up, maybe you didn't see all those. I can provide them again if you like.
Okay, so you went to. So can you explain to me exactly? You went through these litany of studies. So can you go through where it shows that racism is the reason for all of that? Point out the line. Point out the line that says that we've determined that racism was the reason for this.
Okay, let's do it. Okay. 1 second. Scrolling down the conclusions here, guys. As per my pay records indicate that they were Hispanics. Best estimates in the African children. And still holds more restless with the violent crimes and weapons against blacks are stopped about twice as often as whites in contrast.
And while you're looking for that, let me just say that I find, again, the lack of the complete dismissal of, yes, these homicides that are occurring, a black on black crime is insane, that it would be a possible explanation of why police are interacting in different types of ways with the people that are committing these insane amount of violent crimes and elsewise. I mean, that's the irony, and that's how people outside of this movement see it. So we see the riots, we see the people at the head of this that are saying that the country's horrible, we see them saying that white people are dehumanized, we see them embracing people like the Nation of Islam, we see the shop owners being beaten and all of that stuff. And then when we say, but wait a minute, what about, we have 15 unarmed blacks that were killed last year in shot by police, but there was over 7,000 that were killed in black on black crime. And it's just, we've talked about that in the past. That's not what we're focused on with Black Lives Matter. Well, if we're really talking about what's really the most problematic things that need to be solved in the black community, why wouldn't we be focused on all of these homicides?
Hold on. You, and I'll make this clear for anyone, you or no one else gets to tell the black community what it has to focus on. We can decide for ourselves what we focus on.
No. You can decide for yourself what you focus on. You don't speak for any community either. Right?
Damn right.
Okay, yeah, so if I get the right to say, if you, right, so I get the right, if
these issues, so you don't get to tell the Black Lives Matter, you don't get to tell them what they can focus on,
and you don't get to. But listen, here's the irony. Here's the irony. You're talking about a movement.
Whoa. You do not get to tell Black Americans what they should and should not be focusing on their quest for a racial justice. Like, that is not your role. It's not my role, right? That is the organic role of us all, right? Of the community as a whole to decide. And the community has decided to focus on this.
No, that's not what the community's decided. That's what you. No, excuse me. That's what you and certain members of the community have decided. How dare you seek to speak for other people? This is the type of thing that leads to. Excuse me. You just had to talk. You just did. This is what this community has decided to focus on. You don't speak for that community. Excuse me. So then that's what leads to people like Snoop Dogg putting out things that say black conservatives are coons. You don't get to speak for. You don't get to speak for this particular. What community are you talking about then? What community are you talking about then? What community?
I'm telling you, BLM.
Okay.
Those who are part of the Black Lives Matter community.
Okay.
Not black people as a whole, because not all.
You said I don't get the right to tell black people what to think. Then you said that I'm speaking. I don't get the right.
You don't get the right to tell black people.
I agree with that totally. I do get the. But your movement is leading. This movement is leading to things like Snoop Dogg putting out, "Oh, these black conservatives are coons." Right?
Snoop Dogg, guys. Snoop Dogg. Oh,
right. I know. Louis Farrakhan, BLM leaders saying white people are subhuman, calling black people coons. Of course, you don't care about any of that, just like you don't care about the 7,000 black homicide deaths. What I do have the right to say is criticize. No, never. I will never let anyone come on this channel and say that, first of all, that I don't care about those deaths and the larger community doesn't care about those deaths. Because once again, we've been marching for fucking decades on this issue. Sure.
Decades on exactly this issue, but you, Bob Noor, have not been around. You and all those other conservatives were.
How old are you? When did you start your march? When did you start your march?
For decades.
Can you tell me
I'm not talking about BLM. I'm talking about the black community, or those in like Chicago, for instance. The Chicago is the one you guys always want to bring up. The people in those communities for decades have been marching, have been organizing, have been fighting, right? For like Take Back the Night movements, for instance. All growing up, that's all I saw. I remember.
I'm not talking. You're the one that's conflating the black community with Black Lives Matter. We're talking about Black Lives Matter, which you admitted isn't focused on those homicides. That's what I'm criticizing. Real quick, you've gone off on.
It was more. I didn't say it was not.
Well, we know that we can see where their priorities are. And I don't have the right to tell, you're absolutely right about this. I don't have the right to tell anyone on what they should focus about. But when you're talking about destroying this country and the systems within it, I have the right to criticize. You don't have the right to do that. And I certainly have the right to criticize you and your opinions for wanting to do so. And I have the right to talk about the hypocrisy of a movement that claims to care about black lives, but puts 95% of their focus talking about 15 unarmed blacks that were killed last year, as opposed to the 7,000 plus that were killed. And in fact, we need only look at the poor father of the 8-year-old that was killed in Atlanta 2 nights ago, where he's talked about this exact thing. But I guess his voice doesn't matter, right? He has no right to criticize Black Lives Matter either, and where their focus is, right?
Hold on. First of all, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about with some father.
I know you don't.
The father. Hold on. No, I'll give you what the father may have said. Whatever. Okay, that's fine. He can have his opinion. You can have your opinion. But I'm saying, first of all, that the Black Lives Matter movement can decide for themselves where they put their focus on, right? In any case, but I wasn't speaking for the entire black community. I've never spoken for the entire black community, but I've actually said in this channel many times before, I do not speak for the entire black community. I'm saying that you or no one else can do so either, right? So
I can criticize Black Lives Matter.
You can criticize, yes, you can criticize, but you do not get to tell us where we put our focus on. You do not get to tell us, like, oh, you should be fighting for these issues instead, because I have determined that's a bigger threat to the black community. No, you don't get to do that. No one gets to do that.
No, I get to point out the hypocrisy, though.
You can criticize.
Right.
You can criticize.
That's what I'm doing.
That's what I'm happy you want to do. But no. You said, all right, you actually.
I said that if you were concerned, if Black Lives Matter was concerned about black lives, they would be more concerned about they would triage it. They would say, what is the biggest impact to the black community and black lives being killed?
No. Again, you're doing it. So this is where you're doing it again. Don't worry about where their focus is on, right? They can decide for themselves where to focus on. You have decided, they should be looking in this direction, but they're looking in the other direction. That's the way it is, right? But you can criticize them, but this whole thing about you should triage it, and if you don't follow my prescriptions as a conservative, then this movement is invalid. I'm sorry, no.
I'm pointing out their hypocrisy. So, okay, by the same token, you have no right to tell Republicans what they should focus on. You don't get to criticize. No. When you say Republicans don't care about that, you don't have the right to demand that they focus on a certain community. You don't. You don't have the right to say if they care about the black. You don't have the right to say if they care about the black community that they would be doing certain things. You said that they don't care about the black community or they would focus on certain things, right?
I said it's the party of the Southern strategy. That's what I said.
Right.
The Southern strategy. They're the party of racial segregation.
Let me just make it real clear. Black Lives Matter can focus on whatever they want. It's clear where their focus is, that they don't care or they don't spend as much time focusing on what the real problem in the black community is. They're more focused about 15 unarmed deaths because they want to use it as political power to destroy the systems of this country. I also have the right to criticize you and other Marxist and BLM type people that want to destroy destroy this country, and whose policies that we could already see are directly impacting and leading to more homicides as we speak in the black community. Yes, they are.
No. Again, you have to prove that.
I did.
You just gave me, you gave me an article about the LAPD about crime rising LAPD when the lockdowns were lifted. Right. That's all you showed me. And then the LAPD said crime had dropped from where it was last year. So again, you didn't prove that. I'm still waiting for that. I am still patiently waiting.
All right, there's the article I just put. Let's go through NPR. Okay, is that too right wing for you, NPR?
This is the NPR thing you showed me before about Ferguson. Yes, let's do that.
Okay. The horrific attack on a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida has captured the nation's attentions, and last year or so, the murder rate has jumped in America's biggest cities. We're in the midst of a very abrupt, precipitous, and large crime increase, says Richard Rosenfeld, respected criminologist at the University of St. Louis. Specifically, murder is spiking in urban areas. Rosenfeld said for the last year in the country's 56 cities, homicides jumped 17%. That's a far larger percentage than nearly any other year which we've seen. Where there's a spike in numbers like that, criminologists look to see if it correlates with other trends, such as a surge in illegal drug trade, ex-convicts, etc. While both of those things happened in recent years, Rosenfeld's analysis shows that the timing isn't right. They don't quite sync up with the numbers. But there's another potential explanation that does, what Rosenfeld and others call the Ferguson effect. It refers to the August 2014 shooting death of an unarmed 18-year-old African-American man by a white police officer. Rosenfeld concludes in his study that some of the increase is attributed to some version of the Ferguson effect. Notice Rosenfeld says some version. That's because people disagree about the effect it is. It could be police holding back, afraid they'll be criticized for later seeing us do their job. Or you could look at the opposite point of view, that it's a matter of citizens, especially black people, losing faith in cops. When the perceived legitimacy of the police is in decline, communal members take matters into their own hands, Rosenfeld explained, because they perceive that the police are simply not going to provide the protection the community desires. Rosenfeld said that he wants more detailed statistics. For instance, he wants to see if the month-by-month arrest records showing the police holding back. The problem is the FBI is slow with these. Now, it specifically talks about how the Ferguson effect, that it coincides directly with the increase of murders, with the idea of these protests that were going on in Ferguson. Now, there's another study that I'll be able to find at some point.
Sure.
I have to get on JSTOR, which I won't be able to tonight, but I'll send it to you, which took 4 incidents in which, I believe it took possibly the Trayvon Martin situation, the Michael Brown situation, and a couple others, and looked at those cities and the amount of homicides that went up after there were DOJ investigations into possible racism from the police. In all 4 cases, homicides went up dramatically. In fact, that author concludes that they went up possibly in the 3 years since then, 4,000 murders, homicides that increased. Now, this isn't even something that's controversial. If you pull the police out of areas, there will be more violence. That's exactly what we see going on in Atlanta right now. That's exactly what we saw going on in the Chaz zone. So
once again, you have to show me this Atlanta data.
So you want me to provide evidence, for example, that in the Chaz zone, homicides went up once the police were removed in those 6 city blocks.
To do with, I don't know what the autonomous zone. Again, okay. The fact that there were protests, and again, even the article that you just linked me, it said this Ferguson effect that this researcher is pointing to. We don't even know what that is, right? So we can't say that this is the Ferguson effect. We haven't even figured out what that is, right? But okay, the Ferguson effect took place, right? And I guess the Ferguson effect is taking place now in these other cities. So that in some autonomous zone, right, there was crime. And so, as if there was not crime outside of that, was there no crimes outside the autonomous zone? And again, what does that have to do with the larger system? Black Lives Matter isn't an anarchist movement. It's not. So
there were certain. So you don't think there was
in Seattle? So again, I don't understand. Do you think that Black Lives Matter wants to replicate Chaz across the entire country? Do you think that is the goal of the movement? Is that what you're under the impression of?
Did you say that one of the arguments you made earlier was that in Minneapolis, a crowd of Black Lives Matter supporters shunned the mayor because he didn't want to completely abolish the police?
For defunding the police.
No. That's not what they said. He agreed. He agreed to defund the police. Everyone knows that. They did that. They said, we have a commitment for you to totally abolish the police? He said no. That's why he was drummed out of there. That's what they called for.
So I would have to look at that again. But as I remember, specifically said defund the police, not abolish the police.
Sure, I'll bring it up.
I could be mistaken. on that, but that's as I remember it. But you can bring that up if you have the video. I'd be happy to look at it. You can text it to me or put it in the chat.
Okay.
But
is the Huffington Post? Would you accept the Huffington Post as a source?
Sure. That's fine. If they have the video attached.
I don't know if the video's attached or not, but it has the quotes. But we'll see what it has.
Okay.
They specifically, the woman holding the mic specifically said, it actually may have a link to the video. One of the protest organizers asked him whether he would commit to defunding the police department, and she asked the mayor to answer the question with a yes or no. Fryer responded by shaking his head and saying, "I do not support the full abolition of the police department." In response, the organizer took the microphone from him and said, "Get the fuck out of here."
Defund the police.
Fry responded saying, "I do not support the full abolition of the police department."
Did she ask them? Hold on. Let me see it again. I gotta see where that quote is. During the protesters may have called for the state to defund the police. Okay. Scrolling through. Go home, Jacob. I do not support. I see that part. He would not commit to defunding the police department. And she asked him yes or no, defunding the police. And then he says, I do not support the full abolition of the police, right? But she asked specifically for defunding the police. Some people want that to be abolition, granted. And in fact, we discussed that in this channel. But most people, I would say, the point is to defund the police.
Listen,
right? And that's what
but I mean, this is
defund the police does not equal abolish the police. Those are
come on. This is being, and I know this is the argument that's being pushed, right? That no, defund doesn't mean abolish. So if I asked you, will you defund the police, and you say, well, I won't support the abolition of it, and I say, go the fuck home. It's quite clear that I was implying that your statement that you don't want to abolish the police was unacceptable to me. In fact, so it probably seems that when she said defund the police, she meant she wants the abolition of the police. That's what she wanted. The mayor said, no, I will not abolish the police. Now, you might say, but some people don't mean...
And the article says the phrase being used to describe an effort to cut police budgets and redirect that money to other agencies that support communities. To cut the police budgets and redirect the agencies to support communities, right? That's right here in the article that you sent me. The phrase is being used to describe an effort to cut police budgets and redirect that money to other agencies that support communities. That's the point.
Literally, he said, her anger with him was him saying, I will not abolish the police. That was her anger with him.
And, okay, great. But then the phrase defund the police, which is a goal of the movement, defund the police, is being used to describe an effort to cut police budgets and redirect that money to other agencies that support communities. It says it right here. That's in the article you just listed me.
That's fine. That's fine. Some people can mean it. Listen. Will you admit that different people can mean different things by defund the police?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so then when someone, oh my goodness. Okay. Then when someone says, I'm not going to abolish the police, and they say, get the fuck out of here, it's clear that they were upset about that statement that he said he didn't want to abolish the police.
Fine. Okay, then fine. But, okay, fine. But then again, the phrase is being used to describe an effort to cut police budgets and redirect that money to other agencies that support communities. Right here. And the article that you linked to.
I mean, I don't even know how to respond to this. I mean, this is incredible. You admit that it could be used in different ways. You admit that it could be used in different ways. How do you think this woman was using the term?
And she used as abolish, whatever. But going back to the article that you listened
to. It is irrelevant. It's irrelevant.
How is that hard? You sent me the article. I didn't send you the article. You sent
me because you're.
And I said before reading that, did not say that it means two different things to different people, right? Some people are using it as abolish, and some people are using it as defund, right? So okay, sure, that woman might have been using it as abolish. So what? Most people are using it as defund. And the article that you sent me said the phrase is being used to describe the effort to cut police budgets, redirect that money to other agencies that supports communities. Yes, it can be used in two different ways by different people. And sure, she was using it as abolish. So the fuck what?
Okay, that's the only thing that matters. What was this crowd doing when they said go the F home and cheered them out of there? They wanted the abolition of the police. Now, That's what I'm talking about. So yes, there are certainly a significant portion of people in the Black Lives Matter movement that want the abolition of police. Are there some that just want the police defunded in other ways? Sure. But it is clear in this specific incident when he clarified that he thought defund the police meant the abolition of police, and they said it was unacceptable for him not to want to abolish the police. So the idea that...
You're right.
Okay,
you're right. Okay, you're right.
Okay.
Now, let's go back to the article that you sent me. The phrase is being used to describe an effort to cut police budgets and redirect that money to other agencies that support communities. So,
but
yes,
how is that relevant to the discussion that this massive crowd of people wanted the abolition of police?
Because it's because that... Anyway.
Yes, I agree with you. People are using the term...
I think we've reached an impasse. This is supposed to be an hour long.
Right, yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry it got a little heated, but I still appreciate it. But, you know, anytime on one side, people probably think that I'm advocating for, you know, systemic racism or something. And on the other side, I think that you're advocating for the overthrow of this country. Surely it's going to get heated.
Yeah, so I don't think you're advocating for
systemic or covering it up or something. Right, yeah.
Well, I think you're ignoring it. I think you're ignoring the history of systemic racism, of having a break in the history where apparently racism no longer is a thing. That's what it seems like to me. However, I don't think you are, for instance, advocating for it or a person who I don't know, who's like some huge bigot. I would not put that on you, Rob. I've had great interactions with you. Of course, I can never know what's in someone's heart, but like from my observations, you seem like a good person who I completely and totally disagree with on all kinds of things.
That's fine. That's fair enough. But yeah, thank you for having me on. I should have, just to let you know, I'll probably do my show just for another half hour or so. But don't think I'm like backing out on you to like go talk trash. We'll, you know.
Oh no, I'm going to do my own thing.
Yeah, so
that's fine.
All right. Hey, thanks everyone. Yeah, I do have to get to bed tonight too. So sorry if I raised my voice a little there, but hey, have a good one.
I raised my voice back, so it's fine. We got heated, but that's okay because we're talking about real shit. So.
Yeah, it's tough. So I wish you the best and everyone listening to you, and take it easy. Have a good one.
Have a good one.
Oh, I can take these headphones off finally. So yeah, unfortunately, I probably won't be able to bring. I'll try to bring the camera up. We'll see. Hey, it's working. That didn't go as well as I wanted. I'll be honest. I thought I could have done a better job. But it's infuriating, right? Like this idea that we have to ignore everything. Everything's racism. We have to ignore everything that BLM does. It's wrong. I could show that the seminal BLM moment where George Floyd's funeral, Black nationalists were running security there. Well, that doesn't represent Black Lives Matter. I could show Black Lives Matter leaders saying they want to abolish the police. Well, that doesn't represent them. I could show Black Lives Matter leaders saying that white people are subhuman. Well, that doesn't matter. I could have him admit that the primary focus isn't on the homicide victims in the Black community. Well, that doesn't matter. I could show that the homicides have gone up. Well, there's no proof that they went up because of these protests and things like that, so that doesn't matter. Hey, thanks, Whoopsie. Right, and like we didn't even get into those conversations. Whoopsie says, if the USA is systemically racist against people of color, why did Elizabeth Warren feel she had to lie about being non-white to leverage herself into Harvard? BLM is not about mattering, it's about leverage and domination. That's absolutely right. That's exactly what it was. And I think that I got that point across. Now, you have to understand that the entire time that we're doing this in his chat, people just keep screaming, post evidence, post evidence, post evidence, post evidence. That's what they're screaming, and yeah, and Sinbad Ismoa, Sinbad, I'll just say, Sinbad Smo, that's what it is. Yeah, I tried to end politely, and I do think Prime's a good guy, but yeah, I knew that this is how the debate would go. I told people beforehand, if you go back and watch the beginning of this, that it would just be, that's not how I interpret Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter means something unique to me. So let me talk about a couple of the specific points that he made and the idea that I'm telling Black Lives Matter what they have to focus on. That's not what I'm doing, and that's when he seemed to get the most upset. That's not what I'm doing at all. I'm saying you're acting in a hypocritical fashion. When you as an organization, as he admitted, he wants Marxism, he wants the destruction of these systems in the United States, he wants the dismantling of all these statues and the destruction of our history. He thinks that it's a racist country and we shouldn't celebrate the 4th of July. I want you to don't even consider what I said. Just take his admission. And that's a moderate person. I do think he's moderate. That's what a moderate supporter of Black Lives Matter thinks. All right? You get that? shouldn't celebrate the 4th. It's racist. They agree with Colin Kaepernick's stance. They agree with all of these people that say that we need to dismantle all these systems. Notice how he talks about the Southern strategy, but doesn't talk about the history of democratic racism. Thank you, Achilles. I think I did pretty well, yeah. And I do agree, when there's a victim mentality, it's hard to break out of that. So, what's up, Rational Wrong? Nice to see you. So, yeah, that's the important thing that I wanted to get out. Look, most of the time, you're not going to be able to convince the person you're debating of your side, certainly in an issue as contentious as this. Yeah, I will read them, Sinbad. No problem. I definitely will. I'll be a little busy in the next couple days, but yeah, well, here's the problem. So Sci-Fi says he thought I held up well, but I have to bring my sources next time. But here's the problem. I have a very difficult time bringing up sources while I'm doing a live stream because my computer sucks so bad. What source, like, I agree, and also, just for the record, I did tell Prime that I didn't want to do this today because my work schedule's been so brutal. So I had zero time to prepare for this. Now, I did have a couple of the studies like the Bureau of Justice Statistics. I wish I had the Ferguson effect study that showed that 4,000 homicides or something would be increased. But I definitely had sources as far as we know, I guess I didn't provide the source, but we know it was admitted that the Nation of Islam was actually at George Floyd's protest and had a position of honor as the security there. We know that Louis Farrakhan's made all these anti-Semitic claims. We know that he's taken pictures with the Congressional Black Caucus and Barack Obama. We know that that sort of black nationalism is growing and that they actually have a position in institutional power as opposed to white nationalism. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't provide necessarily sources for all that. As far as sources that he, you know, someone in his chat posts a link and says, oh, well, this is all of the racism that occurred. Here's proof of all the racism. But all those studies just said that black people were pulled over more and things like that. But where's the example that racism is the reason for that? Again, no, everyone fails to answer, and he failed to answer as well. The disparity between all of those studies showed the disparity between men and women is greater than the disparity between black and white. So can I say the police are misandrous? The police hate men? We have systemic. Do we need to overthrow this country in the name of actually getting people that support men in power? But no, we totally ignore that. He says, start your own movement. Let me see what you said, long leg. In my opinion, I think it's best for any BLM supporter to express that they support BLM's concern, but not to try to defend the actions of everyone who is attached to BLM because it just seems impossible. Well, yes, that's the truth. But when we look, so there's several ways to look at this. You could look specifically at the actions that occur with people in BLM. At what point do you say, okay, if we start to see the exact same types of actions over and over again, maybe there's a problem with this movement? Right? So the cancel culture things, the riots that we see, the people constantly that we see saying anti-Semitic or anti-white things and positions of leadership of them, embracing the Nation of Islam, all of these things. At what point can we say, wait a minute, why does this keep happening within this movement? And again, it's so flippant how we write stuff off. Pigs in a blanket fry 'em like bacon. Oh, that wasn't a big deal. I can explain that. That was just them jesting. Imagine what his opinion would be if people were doing that, chanting in a population that he was concerned with. If they started using epithets and saying that we should burn or kill people, particularly in the inner city black community, do you think that I'd be able to say, oh, that's written off as a joke? And of course, we had to go to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump dog whistles to racism, this, that, and everything's racist. We get it. I understand that. So actually having the Nation of Islam, a black nationalist group, embrace the ideals of Black Lives Matter, we can't judge Black Lives Matter based on that. But we can judge Donald Trump based on a bunch of other nonsense. Right, I agree, Rational. We need to lock up some of the women. Yeah. Yeah, and there is, and like, so again, I just want to reiterate, the prime thing to take out of this, no pun intended because his name's Prime, is that he admitted he wants to overthrow the United States. That's what he wants. He thinks that the country's racist. He doesn't want any statue. He doesn't, the Lincoln statue, by the way, I didn't get a chance to say this, was paid for by slaves, by descendants of slaves. So, but even still, he says that we don't have the right to say things about what BLM should do, but at the same time, he says I should have the right to say that we're going to destroy all this history of the country. Like, why wouldn't we have a right to push back on that? So, right, and there is discussions that are worth having about systemic racism. But yes, the number one reason that the comps are probably profiling and doing this stuff is because the violence it occurs in those communities. And the solutions being offered to defund the police, we could see over and over throughout history, when you decrease police presence, the amount of violent crime that occurs in these communities will go up. So the actual ideology of Black Lives Matter trying to solve problems in the black community, they're actually making it worse. The same is true with, quote, disrupting the nuclear family. And notice how he said right out of the gate when we talked about that, he's like, I don't want to talk about that. Of course not. He says he wants to talk about the policies of Black Lives Matter, but the one that would have the most negative effect, that the most people would be against, of disrupting the nuclear family, all of a sudden, no interest in talking about that. That's a discussion for another time. Wait. Right, so long-legged Homo sapien says, well, you could look at the flaws in the functionality of any movement that is so decentralized that literally anyone could claim it. It's the same, the problem, say, all people saying doing cringy stuff in the name of feminism. Yeah, but at what point do you say that there's something inherent in this ideology? I mean, is it shocking to find out that when you embrace an ideology that says this entire country is systemically racist and white supremacist, and that white people have white fragility, that is it shocking that violence and discrimination would come as a result of that? So I agree with you. So like, let's say that it's a decentralized group, like it's a bunch of people that like playing Pokemon cards. Okay, yeah, if we start to see 10, 12 incidents of people doing heinous things in that community, we could say, but what is this community, like playing this game of Pokemon, what does it have to do with the heinous things that are being taken place? But we literally see, do you think it's a coincidence for the Toronto leader, the founder of the Black Lives Matter, that says whites are subhuman? Do you think that that's a coincidence? Based on this movement that says the country's founded on white supremacy? Let me read. Let me see. Right. So, yeah. It's going to put, that's exactly right. That's a point I didn't bring up, but that's exactly a good point that I wanted to bring up. That this sort of racial focus and saying that, oh, there's systemic racism and things like that, and this country's still racist and blah, 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 blah. It's foundational on white supremacy. That sort of identity politics, if you watched my debate last night, that pushes people right into the arms of people playing identity politics on the other side. And notice how he couldn't say, when this movement's always concerned about bringing up sins of the past. Well, the institutions, redlining in 1968, it was outlawed. Oh, we got to focus on redlining. But they ignore the fact that all the institutions are totally on board with Black Lives Matter right now, with the exception of Trump. But they want to get rid of him, too, more than anything, right? Name an institution. Right? What are we supposed to do? We have to, we have to continue discriminating. I mean, again, all of the cancel culture stuff just totally ignored. Totally ignored the people criticizing Black Lives. Cancel culture existed before this. I guess I'm against it. But that's ignoring that this is what's going on. All the riots and the violence and stuff like that, all of it just brushed under. Well, that's not really what Black Lives Matter are. So we have to just ignore it. There's been over 20 murders that have occurred during these peaceful protests. We have to just ignore it. That's more than the 15 unarmed blacks that were killed last year. So when you start to make that point, just like in my debate with Destiny, they say, oh, no. It's about more than that. It's about people getting pulled over for speeding tickets and jaywalking and things like that. So that's what we're dismantling the country over? Jaywalking tickets? And again, when we see that actually the discrepancy is worse against men, the discrepancy between men and women is worse than the discrepancy between black and whites. Right. I have heard about the coin shortage. My wife works at a bank, and I've heard about it. Right, and and we see that this is there are calls for black nationalism as a result of this. Right, and so in terms of ideology, anti-white beliefs probably exist independent of Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter probably gives a megaphone to them. I would agree with that. And look, here's the problem, right? Like, why is the very nature of the movement of Black Lives Matter, though? Again, I go back to, there was universal condemnation of what happened to George Floyd. There was people that were very concerned about police brutality before. But we see that once we made it about Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden it started to become over-racialized, right? To the point where they would say, well, we want people of color having their own spaces. We want just again, look at the Chaz zone. We could see all of this that was going on. We saw that they were asking white people to give over money, give $10 to a person of color. This garden's a black-only zone. This is segregation and Jim Crow, the very things that were being pushed by segregationists and Jim Crow in the 60s and before then. So why would we want to return to this sort of segregation mindset? And the more we focus on these things, I mean, I get it. He wants to say, oh, no, we need to focus on all these things that occurred in the past. But notice when I say, why have things gotten worse since the civil rights movement? He's like, well, because of redlining. So things are worse in the black community now because of redlining in 1968 than they were in 1968. This makes no sense. I talk about how we've had the same Democratic politicians and policies that have been put in these communities since the civil rights movement, since the war on poverty. He just says, well, I don't like the Democrats either. So I thought I could have done better. I got a little flustered. I've been really busy today, but I thought ultimately I did okay, and especially up until the last 40 minutes or so of the debate. But once you start to get into just, well, we're just going to like go into this, like all of these studies that talk about, like, I don't think he's getting the point I'm saying, right? Where it's just like, look, you cited a study, for example, that says black people are 90% more likely to be pulled over for jaywalking. Okay, but is racism the reason? Like, just off the top of my head, I gave a potential reason. Maybe it's because there were more cops in the areas where there were more black people living in those communities because there was more violent crime there. And so when the cops saw jaywalking, if there's 30 cops in neighborhood 1 and only 2 cops in neighborhood 2, yes, there's probably a higher percentage that those 30 cops are going to arrest people or charge people for more nonviolent crimes. Why do the cops have to be in those communities? Because there's a surge of violent crime occurring in those communities. But none of those studies go into that analysis. They just say, oh no, it proves it. And again, if that's the case, why are men disproportionately affected than women? Are these cops just deciding, oh, only men could jaywalk? Right, and like, I thought, and I ultimately, let me say, I know if Prime's watching this later, I ultimately like Prime. I think he's a decent person. I think that the ideology that he's embracing is toxic, and it will lead to worse situations for the country as a whole. In the first place that will face the brunt of it will be inner city communities. Right, and see, that's the absolute truth. We know that this cancel culture, that the ideology of Black Lives Matter is so powerful at this point that to even challenge it will get you canceled. Like, look at that couple in St. Louis, charged, being investigated for a crime because a movement that's had rioters all across the country came to their house, and then they called the police, and the police refused to come, and so they were forced to arm themselves and defend themselves, and that's considered a crime. That's what we're talking about. The idea that they're trying to take away your fundamental right to defend yourself. And they constantly obfuscate and ignore all of the violence and all of the racism and stuff that's coming from this movement. They just say, oh, it's decentralized, that's not part of us. Oh, it's decentralized, that's not part of us. But again, one of the points I was trying to make is, why don't you do the same thing with the police? They look at the death of George Floyd and they say, this proves systemic racism. This proves that law enforcement's racism. But the vast majority of police aren't engaged in violence against the black community at all. None of the police in my neighborhood are. So why do they get painted with the same brush? And the truth is because there is some truth in the fact that we need to look at when a particular heinous action takes place. That you need to look at that. And I do agree with him. I think he makes a solid point that we need to hold law enforcement to a higher standard. That's absolutely true. But again, the fact that then we can't look, so we say we could look at specific incidents in law enforcement and say, see, this was incredibly heinous and justifies a march. But we can't do that with the people that are marching. When we see specific heinous incidents they do, and while other people in the crowd are saying, don't record it, because they tacitly or actively encourage the heinous actions that are going, it's ridiculous. I like going to Prime's channel too, but this Marxism, it's incredible. And I know we got bogged down there at the end of the stats, and then the last discussion, it incredibly blows my mind. Right? The idea of, Yes, I understand. Like this is a problem with what we see with these radical movements, and particularly on the left all the time. That they want to use terms that are ambiguous and then change the definition of it. So last night it was intersectionality. Tonight it's Black Lives Matter. It could be Antifa. It could be defund the police. So they'll use terms that are ambiguous and then they'll say, oh, no. Defund the police just means we'll slightly allocate resources to other agencies like social workers, but we still have the police. We're just a slight reallocation of funding. That's what we mean by defund the police. And then when I say, okay, but there are clearly people that are, because I said, look what happened in Chaz when we didn't have police. Look what happened. Who's suggesting no police? Well, the mayor they said, will you defund the police? And he said, I can't commit to totally abolishing the police. And the crowd jeered him out. Thousands of people. And he says, yes, but the article later goes on to say that some people saying defund the police mean just reallocating resources. Okay, that's irrelevant to what this crowd was saying it meant. Yes, but let's go back to your source. And it shows that other people are saying reallocate resources. I agree. No one's questioning that. Yes, I know it's an ambiguous term that people will say means different things. This particular group, which there were hundreds or thousands, meant abolish. To them, defund the police meant abolish the police. Yes, but other people mean, yes, I get it. Other people mean something different. That is not what this particular group is saying. And then the idea, like, I just think that there's disingenuous statements that you see left and right. Thank you. A beacon of light with spoiler alert. With the word spoiler alert. Thank you, Joshua Smith. Right? Like, there's just this disingenuous, right? What about all the black on black homicide? And like, of course, people are going to say, we care about that too. That's what always gets said. Yes, but all of your focus, 95% of your focus is on this other area. So much so that when we're actually talking about the black on black crime and its relationship and what that causes is a relationship with the police, you don't want to say anything. Oh, no, that doesn't really apply. And this is what happens. Like, we have to ignore reality. Oh, no, the riots aren't occurring. No, this isn't occurring. No, that's not occurring. And it is. It's really occurring. We have to pretend that Black Lives Matter is as focused on the black homicides as it is talking about systemic racism and things like that. It's not. It's not at all. Yeah, I thought that, and like, you see this occur all the time, where I question, like, are we even living in the same reality? Oh, no, that's not occurring. No. Like, show me the massive marches. Show me the massive marches of the 7,000 homicides. Show me the people going on television. Show me the protest. Anything? Nope. Oh, they're happening, though. They're definitely happening. That's a good question. And that's why I will say that there are potential. Long-legged Homo sapien says, here's a question. Many conservatives propose that welfare programs are actually harming the black community. Wouldn't this be evidence of systemic racism? Yes, it could be. And I'm not totally denying that systemic racism couldn't exist. I'm not. Even, like, if you listen carefully to what I was saying, I was even trying to say, yes, it's even possible that when we're talking about these traffic stops and jaywalking, racism could have a part in that. But what are we talking about here? We're going to destroy the country because a couple racist cops, or in some way implicitly racist, gave a couple more parking tickets to black people? Of course that's a problem that we need to identify and see. Maybe the reason that there's more violent crime in these communities, maybe it does have to do with racist economic decisions. That could be. All I'm saying is that the focus of Black Lives Matter, the movement that wants to destroy this country and replace it with a Marxist revolution, their focus is on law enforcement. Law enforcement didn't create the redlining policies. The average cop on the street didn't do that. Yet there's an ACAB movement, Blue Lives Matter movement, and all of this stuff. Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate it. Right? Like, all of this is occurring. And the question is, why is it being directly focused at law enforcement? Wouldn't Black Lives Matter say, yes, we understand why the cops have a contentious relationship with us because of all of this violence that's occurring in our community. But the reason for this violence is the terrible policies that have been instituted that we feel were instituted because of racism. Okay, that's a better argument. I'm willing to listen to that. Now, I'm still not willing to listen to the Marxist overthrow or the violent revolutions, etc., that we see as a result of it. But I'm willing to listen to that conversation and think there's merit to it. And yes, I do think that this victimhood culture is in itself a form of systemic racism. When you tell a community over and over generationally, this country hates you, it's all white supremacist, everything wrong that happens to you is because of racism of this country. Nothing wrong is your fault. You can never achieve because of this racist country. When you tell people that over and over again, generationally, of course, it's going to affect how they seek to have personal responsibility and achieve. And that is a form of systemic bigotry. Of course I want to see black people thrive. I think that if we wipe the slate clean as much as possible and say, yes, there were sins of the past, but if we try to correct every sin of the past, then we'll never be able to move forward as a country. So from here on out, what we're going to do is have policies that treat everyone as equal. We will not have race-focused policies. We could have policies that seek to alleviate things like class disparity, like poverty, and if that disproportionately affects one race than another, so be it. But we will no longer focus on race. We will no longer focus on gender. We won't focus on any of that stuff. I think that if we do that, that there are a lot of people, particularly people that claim to care about the inner city black community, and I'm talking about people in the establishment left, that would really be shocked and scared to find out if we end up treating black people just like we treat every other community, within a generation or two, guess what? They might be better than me at my job. Heck, maybe not even within a generation, maybe now. And so instead you treat someone like children, the bigotry of low expectations, and say, oh, no, you can't achieve, everything's racist. No, we need special programs for you. No. Yeah, it's systemic racism. Oh, it's okay. That, to me, is what keeps the community down. I mean, think about it this way. If you're born and you have a terrible situation where you have an abusive father, right? And then you turn 18 and you get out of the family. Then at this point, you have two choices. You could say, I had an abusive father. I'll never be able to achieve in life. The stigma of having an abusive father, every time I fail in life, it'll be because of that. Do you think that that would be beneficial to you as a person more than saying, okay, I got out of that situation. I hate that guy, but I'm going to go out and achieve despite of that. How do you think that you would end up in a better situation? Of course, the latter would end up better. But when you constantly have everyone in position of power telling you, no, this is all your dad's fault, you're not going to achieve as much as you elsewise would have. So, that's what I was going to. Now, I'm sure over in that chat right now, they're saying, of course racism exists. Of course I'm making excuses for it. Of course we need this violent overthrow. Of course Donald Trump's a racist. It's nonsense. Right, I agree. We need to focus on what's the driver of single-parent homes and things such as that. I'm not saying that I'm totally right, but I think a big problem is the policies that we've instituted in these places. You go back to Milton Friedman, and he talks a lot about the unintended consequences of when you start to have these social programs that encourage things like single motherhood. For example, he talks about why are housing projects so bad? Well, because the government gets involved with those projects, and therefore, by them having cheap housing, it encourages, and things like that, and encourages criminal activity to occur there, encourages single parenthood, which then is a self-fulfilling cycle that occurs over and over. Right, learned helplessness. I agree with you, rational wrong thing. It is an evil thing to do to people. And we see it's rampant in in the inner city community. Again, I don't deny the past histories of racism in this country. I don't at all. My claim is, if we're really looking at what is best for the country and for the black community moving forward, I don't see how going back and focusing on this stuff helps. I don't see it at all. Yeah, well, the research does partially exist, but yeah, I agree, the idea of non-stability that occurs in communities, there is some research on it, but we could use more. And again, the problem is why do we need more research, right? Why is that the case? Because so many people in academia just say racism. That's why the actual solutions being provided, and again, I could have done a better job on this, but the actual solutions being provided by Black Lives Matter won't do anything to alleviate negative relationships with the police at all. First off, even as admitted by Prime, it's being endorsed by a bunch of people that don't care, and 4 years from now when the next election cycle comes, they won't care at all. For 4 years they'll do nothing, and then all of a sudden it'll be a big deal. That's what'll happen. And Black Lives Matter will be totally happy with that. They'll go back to not being as vocal as they are, as long as a Democrat's elected, right? But we have to believe, oh, no, it's not about politics. Thank you, Josh Smith. I really appreciate it. Did I miss something in the chat? So yeah, that's the sort of thing, that I'm criticizing. These policies, you actually don't make things better, because in order to fix a problem, you have to isolate what the problem is. And we can't talk about the problem, because anytime you start to talk about why is there so much problem in the inner city, why is there so much poverty, why is there so much violence that occurs in this? Yes, questions of systemic racism and past decisions could be involved in that. But there's also questions of systemic violence that go on there. Right? And again, the point of me bringing up that blacks are 48 times more likely to commit violence against whites than vice versa isn't to say that I'm saying, oh, poor white people, or that somehow that I think the black community is inferior. I'm just talking about how the narrative that's controlled that says that this country's white supremacy against blacks, that's not what we see when we see the actual data. If this data was reversed, and if whites were 48 times more likely to commit violence against blacks, it would be the biggest story in the nation. All we would hear about is how racist this country is and how white people are out beating blacks. But instead, we see that it's the opposite. That's not to say that racism's the reason. I'm not saying that. And it could be because of poverty and things like that. I'm not making any genetic claims or anything like that. I only bring up the point to show, where's the outrage about this? Oh, well, that's not important. Now, these jaywalking tickets... Where's the outrage about men being more disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system? Start your own movement. But with the black community, and right, as long the real leaders, nothing will ever get solved as long as we're making this a racial focus. If we would instead focus on stopping the people in the establishment that don't care to do anything to help working class people, then I think that you would see a better result. But instead, they're just allowed to say, yeah, Black Lives Matter. And then, it's things like this. Like, I say, why aren't they in Beverly Hills? Why aren't they protesting at the senators' houses? Republicans and Democrats. And he's just like, well, here's one or two examples of when they did go. And this one example, it's because the mayor said something specifically against Black Lives Matter. And the other example, it's where the mayor said that she was going to remove the Chaz zone. Yeah, but wait a minute, if we have systemic racism and violence against the African American community, wouldn't you be constantly at the avenues of that systemic prejudice? Wouldn't you be at all of these senators' houses? Why do you only go if they say something bad about you? Isn't that odd? But we have to pretend, oh yes, the rioting and the protests that are occurring in the inner city neighborhood, and the focus of those protests being on middle America and working class people, we have to pretend, oh no, it's also directed at the systems as well. It's ridiculous. We know that that's not the truth. We know that it's not, but we have to pretend. Oh, Black Lives Matter, yeah, they're out there. They're doing all this stuff to the people in the systemic problems. Oh, yeah, Black Lives Matter, they're out there and they're going after the politicians and stuff. They're not. They're controlled by the politicians. The same people that are backing the politicians, like Soros, are backing Black Lives Matter. That's why they don't target those politicians. So, just to recap, because I will have to be getting to bed. First off, I do apologize. I kind of got a little more animated than I normally do in there. But, I mean, it's hard to keep your cool, I guess, when people are calling the country you love systemically racist and wanting to overthrow it. But I do apologize for raising my voice. I don't think it was terrible, but I think it was reciprocal to what he was doing, and I don't really blame him. But do apologize for that. So if I could bring out the main point that I want to get across, I think that, yeah, I've seen Coleman Hughes. I actually, he's who I think he is. I actually like him, yeah. So if I could just say, what was the big takeaway from this debate? Take out anything that I think I did a good job. I think I handled myself well. I wouldn't say it was my best performance ever, but I thought it was good. I thought I made the points that I wanted to make. Oh, real quick on the Nigerian thing. Look, I will say that I have read the stats before about Nigerians in the criminal justice system. But I was unable to find them. So it's fair of him to say I was unable to find them. Now, I did find that Nigerians are far more successful, one of the most successful minority groups. Same's true of a bunch of minority people from the country of India, people from Jamaica, a bunch of other places tend to do better than whites. So if we have such a white supremacist system, why is that affecting? Why are those groups doing better than whites? There's really no answer to that. It's just, we'll prove that that's the case in the criminal justice system. I guess you'll just have to take my word that I've seen those studies in the past that show that those groups that are doing better financially and educationally are also doing better when it comes to the criminal justice system and not getting involved in them. But the big takeaway from this is this. Prime seems like a decent person, and by no means do I get... Right, long leg homo sapien. That's the crucial. I think that a lot of people, it has less to do with skin color and it has more to do with the family structure. Again, remember, he didn't want to talk about the fact that Black Lives Matter, their stated goal is to disrupt the nuclear family. That's anathema to what they should be doing to improve these. But the big point I want to make is, and if you're watching this in the future, I do think you're a good person. I think you have a very dangerous ideology. Anytime you start talking about revolution and overthrowing a country and the mechanisms of it, I think you better be damn certain, and I don't think that he meets that qualification, in my opinion. But see how even someone that would come across as a nice guy and a moderate, see how extreme that his positions are. Yes, this is about socialism and Marxism. Yes, we do want to overthrow. So remember, right, because when I'm in another debate, like, I'll say, oh, this is what Black Lives Matter wants to do. No, they're not socialists, they're not Marxist, no one's advocating that. Everyone just takes this amorphous term and group and says it means what I want it to mean. You can't criticize it, though. The way I want to say Black Lives Matter and say, look, I have problems with how this is playing out in the real world. No, none of those criticisms apply because it's decentralized. But they're allowed to say this is what it means to me and here's why it's a good thing. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope everyone thought that it went well. I had a fun time. I'll probably go talk to Prime again in the future. But yeah, I had a good time with it. So thanks so much, everyone. Thank you to those that supported me financially. I really appreciate it. I only saw on YouTube, so if you gave on DLive or something, I apologize. But I really can use... if I get a better computer, I'll be able to bring up, do debates like this more often and actually use video instead of just audio. So, all right. Thanks so much, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. And as always, have a good one.